Hey everyone. Tonight we're diving deep into one of history's most perplexing, mind-bending, and utterly revolutionary mysteries that has been hiding in plain sight for millennia. From megalithic structures that defy modern engineering to artifacts that shouldn't exist according to our timeline. From technologies lost to time to precision, so extraordinary, it's kept archaeologists awake at night. Ancient Egypt's official history spans back about 5,000 years, yet evidence suggests advanced civilizations may have existed there thousands of years earlier. That means there's a whole chapter of human history waiting in the shadows, filled with mysteries that would make our carefully constructed academic narratives seem like simplistic bedtime stories. So before we journey into these ancient secrets together, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy exploring forbidden history with me. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what ancient site you'd most like to visit someday. It's always fascinating to see who's brave enough to question the established historical narrative with me. Now settle in, maybe grab something to take notes with, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of Egypt's oldest and most perplexing technological wonders. When you think of ancient Egypt, you might picture golden pyramids, hieroglyphics, pharaohs, and maybe Tutankhamun's famous death mask glinting in a museum display. But tonight, we're going somewhere else entirely. We're going to the places where mainstream archaeology fears to tread, where conventional timelines crumble into dust, and where artifacts exist that our current understanding of history cannot explain. Egypt isn't just a land of pharaohs and pyramids. It's a three-dimensional puzzle that exists right before our eyes, filled with structures so precise they make modern engineers gasp, where stone was manipulated as if it were clay, and where the very foundations of civilization itself seem to stretch back far beyond what we've been taught. Picture this. You're standing before the Great Pyramid at Giza on a quiet evening. The tourist crowds have dispersed, and the ancient limestone blocks loom above you like a mountain made by impossibly precise hands. But all around you, stretching across the Giza Plateau and beyond into the deserts and hidden chambers of Egypt, are traces of knowledge so advanced that even our most sophisticated science struggles to understand them. And in that silence, questions arise, theories form, evidence accumulates. The Egyptian timeline doesn't care about your university textbooks or your comfort zone. It operates by rules so challenging to our modern minds that even our most advanced scholars struggle to reconcile what they see with what they've been taught. At sites like Saqqara and Abydos, the precision is almost supernatural. The perfectly cut granite, the impossibly tight seams between massive blocks, the mathematical alignments that would require satellite technology to achieve today. And yet these structures stand, having witnessed millennia pass by. Not just survived, thrived. Monuments that have weathered thousands of years of desert storms, earthquakes, and human interference that have maintained their structural integrity despite everything time has thrown at them. They've endured conditions so extreme that modern buildings would have crumbled centuries ago. Some of them incorporate astronomical alignments, so precise that they track celestial movements over vast periods of time, creating calendars in stone that function over thousands of years. Others display mathematical principles that weren't officially discovered until the Renaissance or later. But here's what really keeps alternative archaeologists up at night. We keep finding anomalies that don't fit, technologies that shouldn't exist, precision that shouldn't be possible with copper chisels and stone hammers. Every unconventional expedition brings back evidence of capabilities that look like they came from someone's science fiction novel rather than humanity's distant past. And for every new discovery, a dozen established theories require revision. Ancient Egypt has been keeping secrets for thousands of years, and mainstream archaeology isn't eager to have them exposed. It guards its paradigms jealously, hidden beneath layers of academic tradition and institutional pressure. But tonight, we're going to dive into that forbidden territory and explore some of the most mind-bending, paradigm-shifting, absolutely fascinating anomalies that exist in plain sight. Because if you think you know ancient Egypt, wait until you hear about what's been staring us in the face all this time, challenging everything we thought we knew about human history. And the really unsettling part, we're just beginning to scratch the surface. Let's start our journey in a place that sounds like it came straight out of a technological wonderland, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Located on the outskirts of modern Cairo, this ancient structure is the largest of Egypt's pyramids and the last remaining wonder of the ancient world, soaring 481 feet into the sky with a base covering 13 acres. To put that in perspective, the Great Pyramid remained the tallest man-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years, until the completion of Lincoln Cathedral in England around 1300 CE. The Great Pyramid isn't just big, it's impossibly precise. The base is level to within 0.6 inches across its entire 13-acre footprint, a feat that would challenge modern construction companies with laser levels and GPS technology. The pyramid's sides are oriented to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees, more precise than we can achieve today without specialized equipment. It's constructed from approximately 2.3 million blocks, each weighing between 2.5 and 80 tons, cut so perfectly that you couldn't slide a credit card between them. How is this possible with the primitive tools mainstream Egyptology claims were available? The question becomes even more perplexing when you realize the pyramid's inner chambers contain blocks weighing up to 80 tons, raised hundreds of feet into the air and positioned with millimeter precision. Conventional archaeology tells us that the Great Pyramid was built around 2560 BCE as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, using copper tools, stone hammers, and tens of thousands of workers dragging blocks on wooden sleds. But this explanation falls apart under scrutiny. No mummy or traditional burial artifacts were ever found inside the Great Pyramid. The interior chambers and passageways bear no resemblance to other Egyptian tombs, lacking the elaborate wall paintings and hieroglyphics that decorate every other royal burial site. Instead, what we find inside is something far more intriguing, evidence of advanced engineering knowledge that shouldn't have existed in the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt. The Grand Gallery, a remarkable corbelled hallway ascending through the pyramid's interior, features a ceiling precision cut at an angle of 26 degrees, with walls accurate to within 1/50th of an inch over their entire length. The King's Chamber contains massive granite beams weighing up to 80 tons, transported from Aswan over 500 miles away, then raised to a height of 175 feet, and positioned with such precision that modern engineers are left scratching their heads. But it's not just the construction techniques that defy conventional explanation. The pyramid's dimensions encode advanced mathematical principles that weren't officially discovered until thousands of years later. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height, multiplied by 2, gives us the value of p 3.14159 to several decimal places. The pyramid incorporates the golden ratio, phi 1.618, in various dimensions, a mathematical relationship not formally identified until the time of Euclid, some 2,000 years after the pyramid's construction. The pyramid's location itself represents a remarkable feat of geodetic knowledge. It stands at the exact center of Earth's landmass, dividing the planet's continents equally. Its position marks the intersection of the longest line of latitude and the longest line of longitude. How could the builders have known this without satellite mapping or global surveying capabilities? These aren't coincidences, they're evidence of knowledge that, according to conventional history, simply shouldn't have existed. Even more perplexing are the pyramid's electromagnetic properties. Modern tests have shown that the Great Pyramid concentrates electromagnetic energy in its chambers and below its base. Research published in the Journal of Applied Physics in 2018 confirmed that the pyramid can focus electromagnetic waves into the substrate region, creating a higher concentration of energy inside the pyramid, and particularly in the chamber known as the Queen's Chamber. In essence, the Great Pyramid functions as a remarkably efficient electromagnetic resonator. What if the Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb at all, but a sophisticated machine? A growing number of independent researchers suggest it may have been a power plant, utilizing principles of vibrational energy, Earth's magnetic field, and the piezoelectric properties of quartz crystal abundantly present in the granite used throughout the structure. The shafts leading from the King's Chamber, long misidentified as air shafts, are precisely aligned with key stars in the ancient Egyptian sky, perhaps functioning as waveguides for cosmic radiation. The original outer casing of the pyramid, now mostly missing, consisted of highly polished white limestone that would have made the entire structure reflect light like a mirror, visible from the moon. These casing stones were fitted together with seams measuring just 1/50th of an inch, a level of precision that exceeds modern masonry. Were they merely decorative, or did they serve as a massive energy-collecting surface, perhaps capturing ambient electromagnetic energy or cosmic radiation? Inside the pyramid, the granite sarcophagus in the King's Chamber shows signs of having been machined with technology similar to modern ultrasonic drilling. Microscopic analysis reveals spiral grooves, characteristic of powered machine tools, technology that supposedly wouldn't exist for another 4,000 years. Even more telling, this massive granite box was clearly placed in the chamber during construction, as it's larger than the passageways leading to the room. The interior layout of passages and chambers follows precise mathematical relationships that appear to be designed to amplify and channel energy. The Grand Gallery, with its peculiar corbelled design and wall niches, bears striking similarities to acoustic resonance chambers. Acoustic tests have confirmed that the entire structure has remarkable sound properties, focusing and amplifying specific frequencies while dampening others. But perhaps most compelling is what's missing: any actual evidence that Khufu built the pyramid. The only link to this pharaoh is a small, crudely painted cartouche in a relieving chamber above the king's chamber, discovered by British explorer Howard Vyse in 1837. Many researchers now believe this marking to be a 19th century forgery, created by Vyse himself, who was desperate for a discovery after spending enormous sums funding his expedition. No other inscription anywhere in the pyramid mentions Khufu or indicates it was meant as a tomb. What if we've been looking at the Great Pyramid through the wrong lens entirely? What if, rather than representing the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian culture, it actually predates dynastic Egypt? Weathering patterns on the Sphinx and enclosure walls at the Giza complex suggest exposure to heavy rainfall in a region that has been desert for the past 5,000 years. Geologists like Robert Schuck from Boston University have concluded that these erosion patterns indicate the Sphinx complex must date back to at least 10,000 BCE, when the region last experienced significant rainfall. If the Sphinx is thousands of years older than Egyptologists claim, might the same be true of the pyramids? Could they be remnants of an advanced prehistoric civilization, one that possessed technological knowledge far beyond what conventional history attributes to early humans? The implications are staggering, suggesting that sophisticated civilizations may have risen and fallen long before our recorded history begins. As we stand in the shadow of these ancient monuments, we must ask ourselves, are we looking at the achievements of a civilization armed with copper tools and brute force, or are we witnessing the legacy of a far more advanced society, one that understood principles of physics, mathematics, and engineering that we are only rediscovering today? The answers might not be found in the dusty tomes of conventional Egyptology, but in the stones themselves, which continue to speak to those willing to listen with an open mind. Moving deeper into our exploration, let's turn our attention to another Egyptian marvel that defies conventional explanation, the magnificent temples of Abydos. Located about 300 miles south of Cairo in Upper Egypt, Abydos was one of the most important religious sites in ancient Egypt, associated with the worship of Osiris, god of the afterlife. But beneath the layers of later Egyptian construction lies evidence of technologies that shouldn't exist, technologies that point to a much older, more advanced civilization. The most mind-boggling anomaly at Abydos is found in the Temple of Seti built around 1280 BCE. There, on a supporting beam in what's known as the Osiris Chapel, we find what appear to be detailed engravings of modern vehicles: a helicopter, a submarine, a speedboat, and what looks remarkably like a flying saucer or aircraft. These glyphs, known as the Abydos helicopter or Abydos machines, have sparked intense debate among archaeologists and alternative researchers alike. Mainstream Egyptologists dismiss these carvings as the result of recarving and overlapping of hieroglyphs, creating coincidental shapes that resemble modern machines. But this explanation falls short when you examine the carvings up close. The helicopter glyph shows a craft with a main rotor, tail rotor, and cockpit configuration that bears striking resemblance to modern helicopter design. The submarine displays the classic cigar shape with conning tower. These aren't vague, ambiguous shapes. They're detailed representations that would require an extraordinary coincidence of overlapping symbols to create accidentally. Even more compelling is the fact that these glyphs were sealed beneath a layer of plaster for thousands of years, only revealed when the plaster fell away in modern times. This means they weren't accessible for later modification or tampering. What we're seeing today is exactly what was carved over 3,000 years ago. But how could ancient Egyptians of the 13th century BCE have knowledge of aircraft, submarines, and other vehicles that wouldn't be invented for another 3,000 years? Unless, of course, they weren't inventing these images, but recording what they had seen, perhaps vestiges of a much earlier technologically advanced civilization whose achievements had passed into legend by the time of Setios. Or perhaps they were copying from much older temple inscriptions, preserving knowledge whose original meaning had been lost to them. Either way, the implications challenge our entire understanding of human technological development. But the mysteries of Abydos don't end with the helicopter glyphs. The site also contains the Assyrian, a megalithic temple that architects and engineers consider far older than the surrounding structures. Built from massive granite blocks, weighing up to 100 tons each, the Assyrian displays construction techniques more similar to those at Giza than to the New Kingdom temples that surround it. The precision cutting and fitting of these enormous stones, achieved without mortar, matches the craftsmanship seen in the Valley Temple near the Sphinx, suggesting they were built by the same culture. The Assyrian was designed to be partially submerged in water, with its foundation lying significantly below the level of the Nile floodplain. Geologists have determined that for the structure to have been built at its current depth, construction would have had to take place when the water table was much lower, at least 10,000 years ago, long before dynastic Egypt emerged. Yet the precision stone cutting and massive scale of the blocks used suggest a technology far beyond what should have been available to hunter-gatherers of that era. What's more, the Osirian's architectural style bears no resemblance to standard Egyptian temple design. There are no hieroglyphs, no decorative elements, none of the characteristic features that define Egyptian sacred architecture. Instead, we find austere, precisely cut granite blocks fitted together with such accuracy that not even a piece of paper can be inserted between them. This same distinctive style is found at other apparently prehistoric sites across Egypt, and indeed around the world from Peru to Easter Island to Cambodia. This global architectural fingerprint, enormous precisely cut stones fitted without mortar, suggests a worldwide civilization or knowledge tradition that predates our conventional historical timeline. If these structures all date from the same era, as their similar construction techniques suggest, then we're looking at a global advanced culture existing thousands of years before Egypt's first dynasty. A truly prehistoric civilization, with the capability to quarry, transport, and precisely position stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, capabilities that would challenge even our modern technology. At Abydos, we also find the remarkable flower of life symbol, a complex geometric pattern consisting of overlapping circles, arranged in a flower-like pattern. This intricate design contains the basis for Metatron's cube, which includes all 5 platonic solids, the only 5 three-dimensional shapes, whose faces are identical regular polygons. These shapes form the fundamental building blocks of organic and inorganic matter, a fact not discovered by Western science until thousands of years later. Yet there it is, carved with extraordinary precision into the granite walls of the Osirian, using a technique that appears to be neither chiseling nor scratching, but some form of laser-like precision etching. The design itself represents mathematical principles and understandings of sacred geometry that weren't supposed to exist in prehistoric times. It encodes knowledge of molecular and atomic structure that humans wouldn't rediscover until the modern era. What kind of civilization possessed this advanced understanding of mathematics, geometry, and physics? And why do we find evidence of their knowledge embedded in structures that conventional archaeology insists were built by a Bronze Age culture, armed with copper tools? The disconnect between the official narrative and the physical evidence grows larger the more closely we examine these ancient sites. Perhaps most telling is the complete absence of any depiction in painting, relief, or hieroglyph, showing how the ancient Egyptians actually built these massive structures. In a culture that meticulously documented every aspect of daily life, from baking bread to harvesting papyrus, this omission is glaring. We have no images of Egyptians dragging massive blocks, no depictions of the supposedly vast armies of workers hauling stones up ramps, no illustrations of the techniques used to achieve such precision. Instead, what we do find in Egyptian texts are references to a time before their own, a time they called Zep-Tepi, or the first time when gods walked among humans and established the foundations of Egyptian civilization. They describe this era as a golden age of advanced knowledge and capabilities, when the templates for Egypt's greatest monuments were established. What if these weren't mythological tales, but actual historical accounts of contact with the survivors or legacy of an earlier, more technologically advanced civilization? As we ponder these questions, let's move north to Saqqara, site of the oldest stone pyramid in Egypt, the Step Pyramid of Djoser, built around 2630 BCE. Conventional archaeology tells us this was Egypt's first attempt at pyramid building, a prototype that would evolve into the smooth-sided pyramids of Giza a century later. But beneath this relatively recent structure lies a vast underground network that tells a different story. The subterranean labyrinth beneath Saqqara extends for miles, connecting various chambers, galleries, and tunnels hewn from solid bedrock. Within this underground complex, we find the infamous Serapeum, a series of massive vaults containing 24 enormous stone boxes, each weighing between 70 and 100 tons. These boxes, carved from single blocks of granite with inner cavities precisely machined to right angles, have perpendicular sides with perfect flatness to within 0.0002 inches, a level of precision that would challenge our most advanced modern stoneworking techniques. Mainstream Egyptology insists these boxes were created to house the mummified remains of sacred Apis bulls, part of an animal cult that flourished during Egypt's later dynasties. But this explanation fails to account for the extraordinary precision of these containers, which far exceeds what would be necessary for ceremonial sarcophagi. It also doesn't explain why no bull remains have ever been found inside them, nor why there are no inscriptions or decorations identifying them with the Apis bull cult. More perplexing still is how these massive stone boxes were manufactured in the first place. The granite used comes from quarries over 500 miles away in Aswan. Each box was carved from a single block weighing originally around 200 tons, with the interior cavity created through some unknown method that left no visible tool marks. The corners and edges of the interior spaces are perfectly square, with no rounding as would be expected from chiseling or primitive drilling. The surfaces are machined flat to within a few 10,000ths of an inch, a standard of precision associated with modern machining techniques, not Bronze Age hand tools. How were these enormous boxes transported from Aswan, lowered into the underground chambers, and positioned with such precision? The access tunnels to the Serapeum are narrower than the boxes themselves, making it physically impossible to move these massive objects into position using any conventional means. The only logical conclusion is that the boxes were placed there first, and the complex built around them, suggesting they predate even the step pyramid above. Or perhaps the builders possessed technologies for manipulating massive stone objects that have been lost to history, technologies that might include sonic levitation, anti-gravity devices, or other advanced methods that fall outside our current understanding of physics. Far-fetched as these possibilities might seem, they actually provide more plausible explanations for the physical evidence than the mainstream narrative of copper chisels and brute force. The precision doesn't end with the Serapeum boxes. Throughout the underground complex at Saqqara, we find evidence of advanced machining capabilities. Perfectly drilled holes through solid granite, some with spiral grooves indicating the use of powered drilling equipment. Perfectly flat surfaces cut through some of the hardest stone on Earth. Right-angle corners carved with flawless precision. None of these features can be adequately explained by the primitive tools supposedly available to the ancient Egyptians. Modern attempts to replicate these feats using copper tools and ancient techniques have all failed miserably. In one famous experiment, engineers attempted to drill a small hole in granite using copper drills and sand abrasives, the method Egyptologists claim was used. After hours of exhausting effort, they had barely scratched the surface, while the ancient builders somehow drilled holes up to 8 feet deep through solid granite with perfect precision. Even more telling are the core drills evident at many Egyptian sites. These cylindrical cuts through solid stone, some up to 8 inches in diameter, show spiral groove patterns identical to those produced by modern diamond-tipped core drills. The consistent pitch of these spiral markings indicates a drill that penetrated at a rate of 0.1 mm per revolution, impossibly precise for hand-powered equipment. In fact, engineers who have studied these drill marks conclude they could only have been produced by machinery rotating at a constant speed under fixed pressure, technology that officially wouldn't exist for another 5,000 years. At sites across Egypt, from Abu Roash to Giza to Abydos, we find evidence of saw cuts through granite, basalt, and diorite, some of the hardest stones on Earth, with hardness ratings of 7-8 on the Mohs scale. Copper, with a Mohs hardness of 3.5, simply cannot cut these materials. Yet we find perfectly straight saw marks with consistent depth and angle, indicating the use of fixed circular saw machinery. Some of these cuts are on blocks, weighing hundreds of tons, far too large to be manipulated under a primitive saw, even if such a tool could affect these hard stones. The evidence for advanced prehistoric technology extends beyond stone cutting. At the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, we find the famous Dendera light bulb, a series of bas-reliefs that appear to depict electrical lighting devices. These carvings show what looks remarkably like a modern light bulb, complete with filament, base, and power source. Inside the bulb is a wavy line resembling a filament, while the base connects to what appears to be a power cable attached to a box-like generator. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss these carvings as representing lotus flowers and snake symbols, but this explanation fails to account for the structural details that so precisely match electrical equipment. The cable shows the characteristic braided pattern of an electrical cord. The bulb displays the classic elongated shape of an incandescent light. And most telling, these devices are shown illuminating underground chambers where no natural light could reach. Could the ancient Egyptians, or perhaps their predecessors, have possessed electrical technology? It sounds fantastic, until you consider the Baghdad battery, discovered in Iraq and dating to around 250 BCE. This simple device, consisting of a ceramic jar containing a copper cylinder and iron rod, has been proven capable of generating 1.5 to 2 volts of electricity when filled with an acidic solution. If such technology existed in Mesopotamia over 2,000 years ago, might the Egyptians have developed similar or even more advanced electrical systems thousands of years earlier? The possibility becomes more plausible when we consider that no soot residue has been found on the ceilings of many deep, supposedly torch-lit Egyptian tombs and chambers. If these spaces were illuminated by conventional flame-based lighting, we would expect to find evidence of smoke and soot, yet many of these chambers show pristine ceilings, suggesting some other form of illumination was used. In the depths of these ancient structures, far from any source of natural light, how did the builders see to create their intricate carvings and paintings? How did they navigate the labyrinthine passages without leaving evidence of flame-based lighting? The Dendera light bulbs may provide the answer, evidence of electrical technology that has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years, dismissed because it doesn't fit our preconceptions of what was possible in ancient times. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for prehistoric advanced technology comes from the most mundane of sources, the tools themselves. In the Cairo Museum and other collections around the world, we find ancient Egyptian cutting tools made from copper and bronze, materials far too soft to work the hard stones used in their greatest monuments. Yet when metallurgists have analyzed the composition of some of these tools, they found unexpected elements. Some ancient Egyptian copper tools contain traces of cobalt, nickel, and tungsten, elements that create metal alloys of exceptional hardness, capable of cutting granite and other hard stones. The presence of these trace elements suggests either deliberate alloying, knowledge of metallurgy far beyond what Egypt of 3000 BCE should have possessed, or the recovery and reuse of materials from a much earlier technological civilization. Even more perplexing are the instances where we find evidence of machining techniques that would be impossible without powered equipment. At Giza and other sites, archaeologists have discovered what appear to be drill cores and saw cuts in granite that could only have been achieved with industrial diamond-tipped tools. Some researchers have even identified evidence of ultrasonic drilling, a technique developed in the 20th century that uses high-frequency vibrations to cut through hard materials. The official explanation for these anomalies usually involves speculation about lost techniques using sand abrasives, copper saws, and limitless human labor. But practical experiments have consistently failed to replicate these results, using the tools and methods supposedly available to ancient Egyptians. The gap between theory and physical evidence continues to widen the more closely we examine the actual artifacts. What emerges from all this evidence is a radical possibility that what we're seeing in Egypt isn't the development of a civilization from primitive beginnings to architectural greatness, but rather the opposite. The most technologically accomplished monuments are the oldest ones. The precision and scale decrease over time, not increase, suggesting that the earliest buildings were created by a civilization with capabilities far beyond those of the later dynastic Egyptians. This pattern of later cultures building cruder imitations of earlier, more sophisticated structures repeats across Egypt. The earliest pyramids, like those at Giza, display the highest levels of precision and engineering sophistication. Later pyramids from the 5th and 6th dynasties are smaller, less precise, and less mathematically perfect. By the time of the Middle Kingdom, Egyptians had abandoned true pyramid building altogether, creating mud brick structures with stone veneers that merely imitated the form of their ancient predecessors. It's as if the Egyptian civilization wasn't building towards some architectural peak, but rather starting with inherited knowledge they didn't fully understand, attempting to replicate the works of an earlier, more advanced culture. With each generation, more of this knowledge was lost, resulting in increasingly inferior copies of the original templates. This pattern is precisely what we would expect to see if Egyptian civilization had inherited the remnants of a prehistoric advanced culture, attempting to maintain and reproduce technologies they no longer fully comprehended. It mirrors what archaeologists observe in other collapsed civilizations, where sophisticated knowledge is gradually lost over generations. When we step back and look at the evidence without the preconceptions of conventional archaeology, a different picture of Egypt's past begins to emerge. Rather than seeing a primitive culture that somehow made unprecedented leaps in engineering, mathematics, and construction techniques, we see a civilization built upon the remnants of something far older and more advanced, a truly prehistoric culture with capabilities that rivaled or exceeded our own. The precision-cut megalithic structures, the impossibly accurate astronomical alignments, the evidence of machine tooling on granite and basalt, the encoded mathematical knowledge, the seemingly electrical devices depicted in temple carvings, all point to a level of technological achievement that shouldn't have existed in 3000 BCE. Unless, of course, it didn't originate then at all, but thousands of years earlier, in that shadowy period before conventional history begins. This brings us to one of the most compelling and controversial questions in alternative archaeology. Who were these prehistoric builders? If an advanced civilization existed before the dawn of recorded history, who were they, and what happened to them? The answer may lie in ancient legends found not just in Egypt, but in cultures around the world, stories of a global catastrophe that nearly wiped out humanity, and of the survivors who struggled to rebuild civilization from the ashes. Egyptian texts speak of the Zep Tepi, the first time when gods ruled on earth and established the foundations of Egyptian culture. The Sumerians tell of the Anunnaki, advanced beings who brought knowledge to early humans. Indigenous cultures from the Americas to Australia preserve legends of a great flood that destroyed an earlier world. Plato famously recounted the story of Atlantis, an advanced civilization destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. These myths have traditionally been dismissed as mere fantasy, but what if they contain kernels of historical truth? What if they're the culturally encoded memories of a real prehistoric civilization in the global catastrophe that ended it? The geological record does indeed show evidence of massive cataclysms at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, precisely when the Sphinx's weathering patterns indicate it was already standing on the Giza Plateau. Multiple impact craters, dating to approximately 12,800 years ago, have been discovered across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia, suggesting Earth experienced a comet bombardment at that time. This event, known as the Younger Dryas impact, triggered rapid climate change, massive flooding as ice sheets melted, and the extinction of dozens of large animal species. It may have also devastated human populations worldwide, particularly those in coastal regions, precisely where an advanced maritime civilization would likely have been centered. Recent underwater archaeological discoveries support this possibility. Off the coast of India, Japan, Taiwan, and other locations, divers have found submerged structures that appear to be the remains of ancient cities, now lying hundreds of feet below sea level. These sites were above water before the rapid sea level rise that occurred at the end of the last ice age, suggesting they were occupied when sea levels were much lower, between 14,000 and 12,000 years ago. If an advanced global civilization existed before this cataclysm, its coastal cities and infrastructure would have been devastated by flooding as sea levels rose hundreds of feet in a geologically short time period. The survivors, scattered and traumatized, might have preserved their knowledge as best they could, eventually establishing new centers of civilization in places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and China, precisely where history records the first cradles of civilization, emerging after thousands of years of supposed hunter-gatherer existence. This catastrophist model helps explain one of the most perplexing aspects of ancient history, the seemingly sudden appearance of fully formed civilizations, complete with sophisticated knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and engineering, with little or no evidence of gradual development. Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley civilization all appear to have emerged with their core knowledge systems already intact, as if they were working from an inherited template rather than developing these complex systems from scratch. It also explains why we find the same advanced architectural techniques, mathematical knowledge, and symbolic systems in cultures separated by vast distances, with no known contact between them. From the megalithic structures of Egypt to those of Peru, Bolivia, Easter Island, and Cambodia, we find identical construction methods, massive precision-cut stones, fitted without mortar, displaying levels of precision that defy conventional historical timelines. The vast underwater plateau of Yonaguni off the coast of Japan, with its right angles, straight walls, and apparent architectural features, may represent another remnant of this lost civilization. Now submerged beneath 80 feet of water, this site would have been above sea level before the end of the last ice age, suggesting its creation by a maritime culture thousands of years before official history begins. Similarly, the underwater structures discovered off the coast of Cuba in 2001 by advanced digital communications, straight lines, pyramidal shapes, and apparent roadways, now lying under 2,000 feet of water, suggest human construction at a time when sea levels were radically lower. Marine geologists have confirmed these structures sit atop limestone that was above water at least 13,000 years ago, long before any civilization should have been capable of such architectural achievements. If these underwater sites do indeed represent the remnants of an advanced prehistoric civilization, their discovery forces us to completely reconsider our understanding of human history. Rather than seeing civilization as a relatively recent development, emerging only in the last 6,000 years, we must consider the possibility that advanced human cultures have risen and fallen multiple times, with each cycle of collapse and rebuilding leaving fainter traces of what came before. In this light, the magnificent structures of ancient Egypt take on new significance, not as the achievements of a developing Bronze Age culture, but as the legacy of a far older and more advanced civilization, preserved by survivors who maintained as much of the knowledge as they could while rebuilding in a post-apocalyptic world. The mysterious technologies evident in Egypt's oldest monuments may represent not the beginning of human technological achievement, but the remnants of a much earlier peak, one we are only now beginning to rediscover. As we explore deeper into the evidence for prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt, we must confront one of the most perplexing questions. How could a civilization capable of such extraordinary feats have vanished so completely from the historical record? The answer may lie in the nature of the cataclysm itself, and in the limitations of conventional archaeological methods. The end of the last ice age was marked by catastrophic geological events, rapid sea level rise, massive flooding, climate instability, and possibly comet impacts. These events would have been particularly devastating to coastal regions, where advanced maritime civilizations would likely have centered their major cities and infrastructure. With sea levels rising more than 400 feet since the depths of the last ice age, vast areas of formerly habitable coastal land now lie submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water, areas that would have been prime real estate for an advanced prehistoric culture. Conventional archaeology has traditionally focused on land-based excavations, largely ignoring the possibility that the most significant evidence of prehistoric civilization might lie underwater. Only in recent decades, with advances in marine archaeology and underwater survey technology, have we begun to explore these submerged landscapes. What we're finding challenges everything we thought we knew about human prehistory. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Cambay Compat, marine archaeologists have discovered the remains of a vast submerged city, covering more than 5 square miles. Sonar imagery reveals grid-patterned streets, large structures, and what appear to be massive engineered docks and seawalls. Carbon dating of recovered artifacts suggests this city was flourishing at least 9,500 years ago, thousands of years before India's first known civilization was supposed to have emerged. Similarly, the underwater ruins off Japan's Yonaguni Island display characteristics that many researchers consider undeniably human-made: straight edges, right angles, columns, and what appears to be a massive stepped pyramid structure. These features now lie 80 feet below sea level, suggesting they were constructed when sea levels were much lower, at least 10,000 years ago, long before Japan's earliest known advanced culture. Even more compelling are the underwater structures discovered off the coast of Cuba by Paulina Zalitsky and her team in 2001. Using advanced sonar equipment, they identified what appear to be massive pyramids, circular buildings, and roads in a precise geometric pattern, now lying under more than 2,000 feet of water. Marine geologists confirm that this area would have been above water at least 13,000 years ago, suggesting construction by a culture that existed before conventional history begins. These underwater discoveries represent just the beginning of a new frontier in archaeology, one that may eventually reveal the true extent of prehistoric civilization. If the most advanced cities and infrastructure of an earlier culture were indeed located in what are now coastal and underwater regions, we may have been looking in the wrong places all along, focusing on inland areas that might have been the hinterlands of a primarily maritime civilization. But the question remains, how did the survivors of this catastrophe preserve their knowledge, and how did it find its way into the monuments of ancient Egypt? The answer may lie in oral traditions, symbolic encoding, and the deliberate preservation of critical information across generations. Every ancient culture preserves legends of wise teachers who appeared after a great catastrophe, bringing knowledge of science, mathematics, agriculture, and architecture. In Egypt, these figures include Thoth and Osiris, who are credited with teaching humans the arts of civilization. Similar figures appear in mythologies worldwide: Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Viracocha in Peru, Oannes in Mesopotamia, always described as arriving from elsewhere, often associated with water, and invariably teaching advanced knowledge to developing cultures. What if these weren't mythical beings, but the actual survivors of the earlier civilization, or perhaps their descendants, who had preserved critical knowledge through the generations? Their advanced appearance, behavior, and knowledge would have seemed godlike to more primitive communities, explaining why they were deified in cultural memory. These survivors would have faced an immense challenge: how to preserve thousands of years of accumulated scientific knowledge in a world where writing systems had been lost and materials for record-keeping were scarce. The solution appears to have been a brilliant system of encoding information into architecture itself, creating monuments that could survive millennia while containing, in their very proportions and alignments, the mathematical and astronomical knowledge they wished to preserve. The Great Pyramid serves as the perfect example of this knowledge encoding. Its dimensions incorporate pi for the golden ratio, the exact length of the solar year, the precession of the equinoxes, and precise astronomical alignments. Its internal passages chart celestial movements with extraordinary accuracy. Even its location encodes advanced geodetic knowledge, positioned at the exact center of Earth's landmass, and marking the intersection of the longest line of latitude and the longest line of longitude. By building these monumental structures, the survivors created physical repositories of knowledge that could withstand almost any catastrophe short of planetary destruction. They ensured that when civilization eventually rebuilt itself to a sufficient level of advancement, future generations would be able to decode the information preserved in stone as we are beginning to do today. But there's another, even more intriguing possibility: that certain groups of survivors maintain their knowledge continuously, passing it down through generations via secret societies and mystery schools. The ancient Egyptian priesthood, with its graduated levels of initiation and carefully guarded secret knowledge, may represent the institutional continuation of this tradition. Similar mystery schools and initiatic traditions appeared in cultures worldwide, all claiming to preserve wisdom from a remote golden age. These secret knowledge traditions eventually manifested in later groups, like the Hermetic Order, the Rosicrucians, and the Freemasons, all of which claim lineages stretching back to ancient Egypt and beyond, and all preserving similar symbolic systems and mathematical knowledge. Even today, Masonic symbolism incorporates Egyptian elements and architectural principles that echo the mathematical encoding found in Egypt's most ancient monuments. Is it merely coincidence that these traditions preserve the mathematical constants, pi, thea, the Fibonacci sequence, sacred geometry, that we now find encoded in Egypt's oldest structures? Or does this represent the continuous transmission of prehistoric knowledge through carefully maintained channels parallel to but separate from mainstream historical development? The evidence for this knowledge transmission appears in unexpected places. The medieval cathedral builders, many associated with Masonic guilds, incorporated the same sacred geometry and astronomical alignments found in Egypt's most ancient structures. The proportions of Notre Dame, Chartres, and other great cathedrals precisely mirror mathematical relationships found in the Great Pyramid, suggesting the deliberate application of much older architectural principles. Even in the Renaissance, figures like Leonardo da Vinci, known to have connections to secret societies, produce works incorporating the same mathematical and geometric principles found encoded in Egypt's ancient monuments. The reemergence of this knowledge in the Renaissance may represent not new discoveries, but the reintroduction of much older wisdom that had been preserved through alternative channels throughout the medieval period. This model of knowledge transmission, through both encoded monuments and secret initiatic traditions, helps explain how fragments of advanced prehistoric technology could have survived into dynastic Egypt and beyond. It suggests that the most ancient Egyptian structures were not the products of an emerging Bronze Age culture, but the work of individuals who maintained direct links to a much older and more advanced civilization, one that had largely disappeared from the historical record due to catastrophic climate change at the end of the last ice age. As we piece together this alternative view of prehistory, incorporating both underwater discoveries and encoded architectural knowledge, a new timeline begins to emerge. Rather than seeing human civilization as a roughly 6,000-year-old phenomenon that developed from primitive beginnings to our current technological society, we must consider the possibility of a cyclical pattern: advanced civilizations rising, falling, and rising again, with each cycle preserving fragments of knowledge from what came before. In this model, the magnificent monuments of ancient Egypt represent not the first flowerings of human achievement, but the legacy of a much older peak, preserved in stone by survivors determined to ensure their knowledge would not be lost forever. The precision engineering, astronomical alignments, and mathematical encoding found in these structures may be the most enduring message from our prehistoric ancestors, a message we are only now beginning to decipher. Let's now turn our attention to one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt: artifacts that appear to incorporate electrical principles thousands of years before electricity was supposedly discovered. The most famous of these is the Baghdad battery, discovered in Iraq rather than Egypt, but demonstrating that ancient cultures in the region had knowledge of electrical principles as early as 250 BCE. This simple device, consisting of a ceramic jar containing a copper cylinder and iron rod, has been experimentally proven to generate a small electrical current when filled with an acidic liquid like grape juice or vinegar. Replicas created by modern researchers produce between 1.5 and 2 volts, enough power for electroplating or other simple electrical applications. If such technology existed in Mesopotamia over 2,000 years ago, it raises the possibility that even more advanced electrical knowledge might have existed in earlier periods. And indeed, when we look at ancient Egyptian artifacts and depictions, we find tantalizing evidence of electrical technology. The most famous example is the Dendera light bulb, a series of bas-reliefs in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera that appear to depict electrical lighting devices. These carvings show what remarkably resembles a modern light bulb, complete with filament, power supply, and supporting cable. Mainstream Egyptologists dismiss these images as representing lotus flowers and snake symbols, but this explanation fails to account for the structural details that so precisely match electrical lighting equipment. The elongated bulb shape, the wavy line inside, resembling a filament, the base connection to what appears to be a power cable, and the box-like generator at the end of this cable all correspond to the components of a functional electrical lighting system. Most telling is the context of these carvings, which appear in underground chambers where no natural light could reach. How did the ancient artisans see to create these intricate reliefs in pitch-black conditions? And why is there no evidence of soot or smoke damage on the ceilings of these chambers, as would be expected if they were illuminated by torches or oil lamps? The Dendera light bulbs may provide the answer, evidence of electrical lighting technology that allowed work in enclosed spaces without the smoke, fire hazard, or oxygen depletion associated with flame-based lighting. But the evidence for ancient electrical knowledge extends beyond these controversial carvings. Archaeological discoveries at various Egyptian sites have uncovered thin gold foil in locations and configurations, suggesting it may have served as electrical conductors. In some underground chambers, researchers have found copper wiring embedded in walls, along with what appear to be ceramic insulators, components consistent with basic electrical wiring systems. Even more intriguing are the residues found on certain Egyptian artifacts, particularly those made of gold. Chemical analysis of these residues has revealed traces of acids and compounds that would be byproducts of electrochemical processes, similar to modern electroplating. This suggests the ancient Egyptians may have used electrical current to apply thin layers of gold to copper, bronze, or other base metals, a technique not officially developed until the early 19th century CE. Some researchers have noted that many Egyptian tomb paintings and reliefs show surprisingly little deterioration or fading, despite being thousands of years old. One explanation for this remarkable preservation could be that the pigments were somehow fixed using an electrochemical process, creating a more durable bond with the underlying stone than would be possible with conventional painting techniques of the era. The possibility of ancient Egyptian electrical technology becomes more plausible when we consider certain artifacts found in tombs and temples. Small, mysteriously shaped objects made of materials with unusual electromagnetic properties. Copper coils and spirals that resemble rudimentary electrical components. Artifacts with peculiar scorching patterns suggesting exposure to electrical discharge. One particularly intriguing discovery comes from the ancient Egyptian collections at the Museum of Cairo. Several small devices consisting of copper plates separated by thin layers of what appears to be bitumen or resin, arranged in a configuration similar to a primitive capacitor. These objects, which have no obvious decorative or ceremonial purpose, bear striking resemblance to basic electrical components. The implications of these discoveries are profound. If the ancient Egyptians or their prehistoric predecessors possessed even basic electrical technology, it would help explain how they accomplished some of their most remarkable feats. Electrical lighting would have allowed them to work in the dark interior spaces of tombs and pyramids without the limitations of torches or oil lamps. Electrochemical processes would have enabled advanced metallurgical techniques, including the hardening of copper tools through electroplating with harder materials. But perhaps most significantly, electrical knowledge would provide a critical missing piece in the puzzle of how enormous stone blocks were moved and precisely positioned. Many researchers have suggested that the ancient builders may have used some form of acoustic or electrical technology to reduce the effective weight of massive stones, a theoretical application of principles now being explored in cutting-edge physics laboratories, where acoustic levitation and electromagnetic field manipulation can indeed counteract gravity on small objects. This may sound like science fiction, but consider the abundant ancient Egyptian depictions of what appear to be power cables or digit pillars being used to move massive objects. These images, traditionally interpreted as mere symbolic representations, take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of potential electrical technology. They may actually depict a technological process that used electromagnetic principles to facilitate the movement of enormous stone blocks. The knowledge of such technology would explain why no conventional depictions of large-scale construction methods exist in Egyptian art. If they were using advanced techniques rather than brute force, there would be no armies of workers to depict dragging blocks on sleds. Instead, we find enigmatic images of cables, pillars, and devices that make little sense in a primitive technological context, but become comprehensible if interpreted as elements of a more advanced technological system. Further evidence for prehistoric electrical knowledge comes from examination of certain Egyptian statues and objects that appear to have been subjected to high-voltage discharge. Microscopic analysis reveals patterns of vitrification and material flow, consistent with exposure to electrical current patterns that would be nearly impossible to create using conventional techniques of the era. These findings align with ancient textual references to mysterious light sources and energy manipulation. Egyptian writings mention the power of the jade and describe devices that could produce light without flame. The pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in the world, contain enigmatic references to energy, light, and power that take on new meaning when considered in the context of potential electrical technology. But if the ancient Egyptians indeed possessed such knowledge, where did it come from? The answer may lie in that shadowy prehistoric period before the rise of dynastic Egypt, the time when the Sphinx and other megalithic structures appear to have been created, based on weathering evidence and astronomical alignments. The electrical technology evident in ancient Egyptian artifacts may represent the remnants of a much more advanced system developed by an earlier civilization, fragments of knowledge preserved after a catastrophic collapse. This model helps explain the peculiar pattern we observe in Egyptian technological capabilities, where the oldest artifacts often display the most advanced techniques, with later periods showing declining rather than advancing capabilities. If the earliest Egyptian culture inherited fragments of a much more sophisticated technological tradition, we would expect precisely this pattern. Initial achievements reflecting received knowledge that was gradually lost or diluted over subsequent generations. The electrical artifacts and depictions would thus represent not the beginning of technological development, but the fading remnants of a much earlier peak, preserved in physical form and symbolic representation by survivors determined to maintain as much of their advanced knowledge as possible in a post-catastrophe world with limited resources and capabilities. This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient Egypt from a primitive culture that somehow made unprecedented leaps in engineering and construction to a civilization built upon the shoulders of something far older and more advanced, a truly prehistoric culture whose technologies rivaled or exceeded our own in certain specialized applications. The evidence for prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt extends beyond electrical systems to include another key area, acoustic technology and its applications. Ancient Egyptian temples and chambers display extraordinary acoustic properties that appear to be deliberately engineered rather than accidental. These acoustic effects would have required sophisticated understanding of sound wave propagation, resonance, and harmonic principles, knowledge that supposedly didn't exist until the modern era. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid, for example, is constructed in such a way that it amplifies and sustains certain frequencies while dampening others. Acoustic engineers who have studied this chamber have discovered that it resonates perfectly at 16 Hz, a frequency in the upper infrasound range that is known to produce specific psychological and physiological effects in humans, including altered states of consciousness. This precise resonant frequency couldn't be accidental. The dimensions, material selection, and interior arrangement of granite blocks in this chamber had to be deliberately calculated to produce this specific acoustic effect. What's more, the 16 Hz resonance interacts with the Earth's own natural resonant frequency, the Schumann resonance of 7.83 Hz, to create specific harmonic patterns. How did the ancient builders achieve this level of acoustic precision without modern measuring equipment and wave theory? Similar acoustic engineering appears in other ancient Egyptian structures. The Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid functions as a remarkable amplification chamber, focusing and directing sound waves with extraordinary efficiency. Sound produced at the bottom of this space is naturally amplified and projected upward, while specific frequencies create standing wave patterns throughout the structure. At Karnak Temple, the sacred spaces were designed with precise acoustic properties that allow whispered words at certain locations to be clearly heard hundreds of feet away, while remaining inaudible to people standing nearby. This acoustic focusing effect requires sophisticated understanding of sound wave behavior, knowledge that shouldn't have existed in ancient times. Even more telling are the acoustic properties of underground chambers found throughout Egypt. Many of these spaces appear to have been deliberately engineered to amplify specific frequencies associated with altered states of consciousness and heightened sensitivity. When tested with modern equipment, these chambers show resonant frequencies in the range of 95 to 120 Hz, precisely the frequency range shown by contemporary neuroscience to affect human brain activity, specifically shifting the brain from beta wave, normal consciousness, to alpha wave, meditative state functioning. These acoustic properties gain additional significance when we consider ancient Egyptian texts describing sound as a creative and transformative force. The concept of Heka, often translated simply as magic, but more accurately understood as applied vibrational energy, features prominently in Egyptian religious and technical writings. Many texts describe specific sounds, tones, and vibrations used to achieve particular effects, from healing to material transformation to consciousness alteration. Could these references to the power of sound represent preserved knowledge of advanced acoustic technology? The physical evidence in the structures themselves suggests exactly that: deliberate engineering to produce specific acoustic effects that would serve particular functional purposes. This acoustic engineering may have extended beyond ceremonial applications to practical construction techniques. Many researchers have noted that the massive stone blocks used in Egypt's most ancient monuments fit together with such precision that not even a razor blade can be inserted between them. Traditional explanations involving copper chisels and stone hammers fail to account for this level of precision, especially given the hardness of the materials involved. But what if the ancient builders used acoustic technology, specifically targeted resonant frequencies, to temporarily alter the properties of stone? Modern physics has demonstrated that certain frequencies can affect the molecular structure of materials, temporarily reducing friction or even liquefying solid substances under specific conditions. Advanced acoustic technology might have allowed the prehistoric builders to achieve the seemingly impossible perfect fits we observe in Egypt's oldest structures. This hypothesis gained support from ancient depictions and texts describing the use of sound to move and shape stone. Egyptian writings mention mysterious instruments used to command stone and make the inert become that which lives. These enigmatic references take on new meaning when considered alongside the physical evidence of precision stone working that defies conventional explanation. The potential applications of acoustic technology extend even further when we consider the possibility of sonic levitation, the use of specific sound wave patterns to counteract gravity. While this might sound like science fiction, modern acoustic laboratories have demonstrated that precisely tuned standing sound waves can indeed levitate small objects. Scaling this principle to larger applications would require far more powerful and precisely tuned acoustic generators, technology that might have existed in prehistoric times and been partially preserved in the acoustic engineering evident in ancient Egyptian structures. Some researchers have suggested that the trumpets and horns depicted in certain Egyptian reliefs may actually represent acoustic devices used in construction, tools that harness sound waves to reduce the effective weight of massive stone blocks or alter their surface properties to achieve the perfect fits we observe. These depictions, traditionally interpreted as ceremonial or symbolic, may actually show specialized technological equipment whose true purpose was forgotten or misunderstood by later generations. The acoustic properties of ancient Egyptian structures take on additional significance when we consider their potential integration with the electrical technology discussed earlier. Sound and electricity are intimately connected through principles of piezoelectricity, the generation of electrical charge in certain materials when subjected to mechanical stress, including sound waves. Many of the stones used in Egypt's most ancient monuments, particularly the granite of the King's Chamber, contain high concentrations of quartz crystal, a material known for its strong piezoelectric properties. When subjected to specific acoustic frequencies, these quartz-rich stones would generate small electrical currents. If amplified and harnessed through properly designed circuits, this phenomenon could produce significant electrical effects. Could the ancient builders have created structures that functioned as massive piezoelectric generators, converting acoustic energy into electricity? The combination of precisely engineered acoustic chambers with the strategic placement of quartz-rich stone suggests exactly this possibility. The Great Pyramid, with its remarkable acoustic properties and quartz-laden granite interior chambers, may have functioned as something far more sophisticated than a tomb, perhaps a power plant that converted Earth's natural vibrational energy into usable electrical current. This integrated acoustic electrical technology would explain many of the anomalous features observed in Egypt's most ancient structures, from their unusual material choices to their precise geometric proportions to their specific orientations relative to Earth's magnetic field. It would also account for the numerous depictions of what appear to be electrical devices and power cables in Egyptian art and hieroglyphs. The evidence for prehistoric acoustic technology appears not just in Egypt, but at megalithic sites worldwide, from Stonehenge in England to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey to the massive stone structures of Peru and Bolivia. All these sites display similar acoustic properties, suggesting a global understanding of sound engineering principles that predates conventional history. This worldwide distribution of advanced acoustic knowledge parallels the global pattern of megalithic construction techniques, precision-cut stones fitted without mortar, displaying levels of accuracy that defy conventional historical timelines. The presence of similar acoustic and construction technologies across multiple continents suggests a prehistoric global civilization that possessed and shared this knowledge before the catastrophic events that marked the end of the last ice age. As we assemble these pieces, evidence of electrical technology, acoustic engineering, precision stoneworking, and advanced mathematical knowledge, a picture emerges of a prehistoric civilization with capabilities far beyond what conventional history attributes to any ancient culture. This civilization appears to have peaked before the catastrophic events that marked the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, with its survivors preserving fragments of their advanced knowledge in the megalithic structures and symbolic systems that would eventually give rise to dynastic Egypt and other early historical civilizations. The most compelling aspect of this alternative historical model is how effectively it resolves the numerous anomalies and contradictions in conventional Egyptology. Rather than struggling to explain how a primitive Bronze Age culture made unprecedented leaps in mathematics, engineering, and construction techniques, we can understand these achievements as the preserved legacy of a much older and more advanced civilization, one whose existence has been hidden from us, not by deliberate conspiracy, but by the catastrophic climate changes that literally submerged much of their world beneath hundreds of feet of rising sea levels. As we continue piecing together this prehistoric puzzle, let's examine another category of evidence for advanced technology in ancient Egypt: the numerous artifacts and depictions that suggest sophisticated understanding of aerodynamics and possibly even flight. While mainstream archaeology dismisses these findings as mere coincidence or symbolic representation, the physical characteristics of these objects tell a different story. Among the most famous of these artifacts is the so-called Cairo bird, a small wooden object discovered in a tomb near Saqqara and dated to approximately 200 BCE. This artifact, currently housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, bears a striking resemblance to a modern aircraft, complete with wings, a vertical stabilizer tail, and a streamlined fuselage. When tested in a wind tunnel by aeronautical engineers, replicas of this object demonstrated remarkable flight characteristics, generating lift and exhibiting stability patterns consistent with intentional aerodynamic design. What's particularly telling about the Cairo bird is that it doesn't resemble any known bird or flying creature. Its wing configuration and body shape are distinctly mechanical rather than organic. The wings are straight and unflexed, positioned at the precise angle for optimal lift generation. The vertical stabilizer tail is perpendicular to the wings, rather than in line with them, as would be expected in a bird representation. And the body has a streamlined, symmetrical shape that maximizes aerodynamic efficiency. These characteristics make little sense if the object was intended to represent a bird or other natural flying creature, but they make perfect sense if it was meant to represent a flying machine. The fact that this artifact dates from a relatively late period, the Ptolemaic era, suggests it may be a model or representation of much older technology, perhaps created to preserve the memory of flying machines that existed in Egypt's distant past. But the Cairo bird isn't the only evidence suggesting ancient Egyptian knowledge of aerodynamics. The famous Saqqara bird, another wooden artifact dating from around 200 BCE, displays similar aircraft-like characteristics: a streamlined body, straight wings, and a vertical tail fin. Like the Cairo bird, replicas of this object have demonstrated genuine aerodynamic properties when tested in wind tunnels. Even more intriguing are the numerous hieroglyphic depictions and models of what appear to be sophisticated flying craft. In the Temple of Seti at Abydos, carved on a supporting beam, we find what looks remarkably like a helicopter, complete with main rotor, tail rotor, and cockpit configuration. Nearby on the same panel are images resembling other modern vehicles: a submarine, a speedboat, and what appears to be some type of aircraft or flying disc. Mainstream Egyptologists dismiss these carvings as the result of recarving and overlapping of hieroglyphs, creating coincidental shapes that resemble modern machines. But this explanation fails to account for the specific and detailed nature of these images, particularly the helicopter glyph, which shows recognizable components in their correct proportional relationships, exactly what we would expect in a schematic representation of an actual flying machine. Similar aircraft-like depictions appear in Egyptian tombs, temples, and pottery. Some show what appear to be people operating or riding in flying vehicles. Others depict aerial views of landscapes that would be impossible to observe without some form of flight. These images, traditionally interpreted as purely symbolic or religious, take on new meaning when considered alongside the physical artifacts with demonstrated aerodynamic properties. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for ancient Egyptian flight technology comes from textual sources, specifically descriptions of the flying boats of the gods mentioned in various religious and historical texts. These aren't vague or purely metaphorical references, but detailed descriptions of vehicles that could move through the air, carrying passengers over great distances in short periods of time. The famous Tully Papyrus, dated to the reign of Thutmose III, around 1480 BCE, contains what appears to be an eyewitness account of a mass sighting of flying objects. The text describes circles of fire that appeared in the sky, brighter than the sun and flying in formation. After hovering over the royal palace, these objects reportedly ascended into the sky and disappeared. While the original papyrus has been lost, copies of the translation have been preserved, and its content aligns with similar accounts found in other ancient cultures. Egyptian texts also contain references to the Ben stone, a mysterious object associated with the sun god Ra'let that was said to have descended from the sky. Descriptions of this object suggest a technological rather than natural origin, and some researchers have suggested it may have been part of an advanced flying craft. The Ben stone was reportedly housed in a special shrine at Heliopolis, where it was venerated as a sacred relic of the gods. These textual references gain additional significance when considered alongside the physical evidence of aerodynamic knowledge found in Egyptian artifacts and depictions. Together, they suggest not just theoretical understanding of flight principles, but practical application of this knowledge in actual flying machines, technology that shouldn't have existed in ancient times, according to conventional historical timelines. But if the ancient Egyptians, or their prehistoric predecessors, indeed possessed flight technology, how did they power these machines? The answer may lie in the electrical and acoustic technologies we've already discussed. Modern research into alternative propulsion systems has demonstrated that high-voltage electrical fields can indeed create lift through electrogravitics, the interaction between electrical energy and gravitational fields. Ancient Egyptian depictions of what appear to be power generation systems, coupled with the evidence for sophisticated electrical knowledge, suggest they may have developed similar technology thousands of years before our modern rediscovery of these principles. The integration of electrical and acoustic systems evident in their most ancient structures points to a unified field of knowledge that could have encompassed flight technology as well. The implications of prehistoric flight capability are profound, helping to explain one of the most persistent mysteries of ancient history: how remarkably similar architectural, mathematical, and symbolic systems appeared simultaneously in cultures separated by vast oceans and mountain ranges, with no known contact between them. If an advanced prehistoric civilization possessed the ability to fly, this global distribution of knowledge becomes not just possible but expected. It also helps explain the remarkable similarities between ancient Egyptian technological capabilities and those found in other early civilizations, particularly in South America. The precision stoneworking, astronomical alignments, and megalithic construction techniques evident at sites like Pumapunku, Tiwanaku, and Sacsayhuaman in the Andes display striking parallels to those found in Egypt's oldest monuments, suggesting not independent development, but a common technological heritage made possible by prehistoric global travel. Even the mysterious cargo cults that emerged in various isolated regions following contact with modern civilization find parallels in ancient Egyptian religious practices. The veneration of technologies not fully understood, the creation of ritual objects resembling advanced machines, the preservation of technical knowledge in symbolic and religious forms. All these patterns suggest similar human responses to contact with capabilities beyond their own technological level. When we step back and view these various lines of evidence together, aerodynamic artifacts, depictions of flying machines, textual references to aerial vehicles, advanced electrical and acoustic technology, global distribution of specialized knowledge, a coherent picture begins to emerge. Rather than isolated anomalies or coincidental resemblances, these findings represent the fragmented but persistent evidence of a prehistoric technological civilization, whose capabilities included powered flight. This civilization appears to have reached its peak before the catastrophic events that marked the end of the last ice age, with its survivors preserving fragments of their advanced knowledge in the megalithic structures, symbolic systems, and religious traditions that would eventually give rise to dynastic Egypt and other early historical civilizations. The aerodynamic artifacts and depictions we find in later Egyptian culture may represent not their own inventions, but their attempts to preserve and understand the legacy of a much older and more advanced technological tradition. As we continue exploring the evidence for prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt, we must address one of the most controversial yet compelling categories: artifacts and depictions, suggesting knowledge of genetic engineering and advanced biological sciences. While mainstream archaeology dismisses these findings as merely symbolic or religious, certain physical characteristics and contextual elements suggest a more literal technological interpretation. Among the most striking of these are the numerous depictions of hybrid beings, entities combining human and animal characteristics in ways that go beyond simple artistic representation. The Egyptian pantheon includes figures like Anubis human body with a jackal head, Horus human body with a falcon head, Sobek human body with a crocodile head, and many others. While conventionally interpreted as purely mythological, these depictions show anatomical details and proportional relationships that suggest actual biological entities rather than merely symbolic figures. The precision and consistency of these hybrid representations across thousands of years of Egyptian art indicates they weren't arbitrary inventions, but based on some form of template or observed reality. What's particularly telling is that many of these hybrid beings are shown performing specific technical operations, medical procedures, astronomical calculations, construction activities, suggesting they possess specialized knowledge and capabilities. Even more intriguing are the numerous small artifacts and statues depicting what appear to be humanoid beings with distinctly non-human characteristics: elongated skulls, large eyes, slender limbs, and other features that don't correspond to any known human population. These objects, often dismissed as stylized representations or artistic conventions, show consistent anatomical details that suggest they were modeled on actually observed entities. The famous statues of Akhenaten and his family, with their elongated skulls, slender limbs, and unusual body proportions, have traditionally been explained as either artistic style or evidence of physical deformities. But these same distinctive characteristics appear in artwork and artifacts from other ancient cultures around the world, from Peru to Malta to Iraq, suggesting a global phenomenon rather than a local artistic tradition or isolated genetic condition. Egyptian texts contain numerous references to beings called the Nataru, often translated simply as gods, described as possessing advanced knowledge and capabilities while interacting directly with humans. These texts include detailed accounts of the Netaru manipulating human genetics, specifically engineering hybrid beings for various purposes. The Egyptian creation myths speak of Khnum creating humans on a potter's wheel, but with the specific detail that he modified their genetic essence to produce different types of people. What if these weren't merely metaphorical stories, but preserved accounts of actual genetic engineering conducted by an advanced prehistoric civilization? The physical evidence in Egyptian art and artifacts, combined with the textual references to genetic manipulation, suggests exactly this possibility. The hybrid beings depicted in Egyptian art may represent not mythological inventions, but the results of actual genetic experiments conducted by the scientific elite of a prehistoric advanced culture. This interpretation gains support from the numerous Egyptian medical papyri that display knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and biological processes far beyond what should have been available to a Bronze Age civilization. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, for example, contains descriptions of the brain, spinal cord, and nervous system that weren't rediscovered by Western medicine until thousands of years later. It describes surgical procedures of remarkable sophistication, including cranial surgery that would challenge modern neurosurgeons. The level of biological knowledge evident in these texts suggests not just careful observation, but actual experimental manipulation of living organisms, precisely what would be required for genetic engineering. The ancient Egyptians' extraordinary skills in mummification further demonstrate their advanced understanding of anatomy and biological preservation techniques, knowledge that would be prerequisite for more sophisticated biological technologies. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for prehistoric genetic engineering comes from the numerous unexplained anomalies in the human fossil record, sudden appearances of new genetic traits, unexpected hybridization patterns, and other findings that challenge conventional evolutionary models. Recent genetic studies have identified what appear to be instances of targeted genetic modification in the human genome, changes too specific and advantageous to be explained by random mutation and natural selection alone. If an advanced prehistoric civilization possessed genetic engineering capabilities, we would expect to find precisely these kinds of anomalies in the fossil and genetic record, evidence of deliberate manipulation rather than purely natural evolutionary processes. The Egyptian depictions in texts describing genetic modification may represent not fictional accounts, but the preserved memory of actual technological achievements by a much earlier scientific culture. This perspective helps explain one of the most persistent mysteries in human development, the so-called missing link in human evolution. Despite decades of intensive searching, paleontologists have failed to find the expected transitional forms between earlier hominids and anatomically modern humans. Instead, the fossil record shows what appears to be the sudden appearance of Homo sapiens, with our distinctive characteristics, larger brains, refined vocal apparatus, altered spine and pelvis, emerging with remarkable rapidity rather than through the gradual process expected in natural evolution. What if this apparent evolutionary jump represented not a gap in the fossil record, but evidence of prehistoric genetic engineering? The Egyptian texts describing the creation or modification of humans by the Netaru may preserve the cultural memory of actual technological intervention in human genetic development, a scientific achievement by an advanced prehistoric civilization that was later remembered and recorded in religious and mythological terms by their cultural descendants. This model also helps explain the global distribution of identical creation myths, stories found in cultures across the world, describing how humans were created or modified by advanced beings who came from the sky. From the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki creating humans by mixing their DNA with that of existing hominids, to similar narratives in cultures, from Africa to the Americas to Polynesia, these remarkably consistent stories may represent not coincidental mythological parallels, but the preserved memory of actual events experienced by our ancestors worldwide. The implications of prehistoric genetic engineering extend beyond theoretical interest to practical significance for our understanding of human development and potential. If an advanced civilization, thousands of years ago, possessed the capability to manipulate DNA and create hybrid organisms, they may have embedded specific genetic sequences in the human genome, sequences designed to activate certain capabilities or traits under particular conditions or at predetermined times. Some researchers have suggested that the seemingly sudden accelerations in human technological and intellectual development throughout history, from the Neolithic Revolution to the Renaissance to the modern digital age, may represent the sequential activation of such embedded genetic programs, triggered by specific environmental or astronomical conditions. This would explain why human advancement often occurs in dramatic leaps, rather than through gradual, continuous development. The evidence for prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt thus extends beyond mechanical and physical systems to include sophisticated biological sciences as well. The integration of these various technological domains, electrical, acoustic, aerodynamic, and genetic, suggests a unified field of knowledge possessed by a prehistoric civilization whose scientific understanding in many ways paralleled or even exceeded our own. As we assemble these diverse pieces of evidence, from megalithic architecture to precision machining to electrical artifacts to aerodynamic models to depictions of genetic engineering, a coherent picture begins to emerge. Rather than isolated anomalies or coincidental resemblances, these findings represent the fragmented but persistent evidence of a prehistoric advanced civilization that thrived before the catastrophic events marking the end of the last ice age. This civilization appears to have possessed a unified scientific paradigm that integrated various fields we now consider separate: physics, engineering, biology, acoustics, electromagnetics, into a comprehensive technological system. The remnants of this advanced knowledge were preserved by survivors who established what would eventually become dynastic Egypt and other early historical civilizations, encoding their scientific understanding in architectural forms, symbolic systems, and religious traditions designed to transmit essential information across millennia. The megalithic structures of ancient Egypt thus represent not the first primitive attempts at monumental architecture, but the last magnificent echoes of a far older and more advanced technological tradition, preserved in stone by survivors determined to ensure their knowledge would not be lost forever. The precision engineering, astronomical alignments, and mathematical encoding found in these structures may be the most enduring message from our prehistoric ancestors, a message we are only now beginning to decipher. As we near the conclusion of our exploration into prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt, let's examine one final category of evidence: the numerous indications of sophisticated astronomical knowledge embedded in Egypt's oldest monuments and texts. This celestial understanding goes far beyond what should have been possible for a primitive Bronze Age culture, suggesting inheritance from a much more advanced scientific tradition. The most famous example is the precise astronomical alignment of the Great Pyramid. Its four sides are oriented to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees, a level of precision that would require sophisticated surveying equipment and knowledge of true north as opposed to magnetic north, which shifts over time. Even more remarkable, the pyramid's design incorporates alignments to specific stars and constellations, particularly those in Orion's belt and the circumpolar stars that never set below the horizon. The air shafts within the Great Pyramid point to specific stars that held significance in ancient Egyptian religion: Thuban, Alpha Draconis, and the stars of Orion's belt. But these alignments only make sense for the position of these stars around 10,500 BCE, not the conventional construction date of 2560 BCE. This misalignment has led researchers like Robert Bauval to propose the Orion correlation theory, suggesting the Giza pyramids were designed to mirror the pattern of stars in Orion's belt, as they appeared in that much earlier epoch. What's particularly compelling about this theory is that it corresponds precisely with the time period indicated by weathering patterns on the Sphinx and its enclosure, around 10,500 BCE, when the region last experienced significant rainfall. This convergence of multiple independent lines of evidence, pointing to the same time period, suggests we're looking at something more significant than coincidence or speculation. But the astronomical knowledge encoded in ancient Egyptian monuments goes far beyond simple stellar alignments. The proportions and measurements of the Great Pyramid incorporate precise values for the circumference of Earth, the exact length of the solar year, including the extra fraction that necessitates leap years, and even the precession of the equinoxes, the 920-year cycle caused by Earth's axial wobble that shifts the apparent position of stars over long time periods. This last point is particularly significant, as recognizing and measuring the precession cycle requires sophisticated astronomical observation over thousands of years, far longer than any single human lifetime, and beyond the scope of what a developing civilization should have been capable of. Yet this knowledge appears fully formed in Egypt's oldest monuments, suggesting inheritance from a much older scientific tradition rather than independent discovery. Egyptian texts contain numerous references to astronomical phenomena described with remarkable precision. The concept of Zeptepi, or the first time, is consistently associated with a specific celestial configuration, the heliacal rising of Sirius, when this star first becomes visible on the eastern horizon, just before dawn, coinciding with the summer solstice and the annual flooding of the Nile. This alignment did indeed occur around 10,500 BCE, the same period indicated by the Sphinx weathering and the Orion correlation. Even more telling are Egyptian descriptions of celestial events that modern astronomy confirms did occur in that remote epoch, including references to the passing of comets, meteor showers, and other phenomena that can be retroactively dated through contemporary astronomical calculations. These accounts display knowledge that couldn't possibly have been invented without actual observation of the events described. The famous Dendera zodiac, a ceiling bas-relief from the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, shows the night sky with remarkable accuracy, including specific astronomical alignments that correspond to the position of the stars around 10,000 BCE. This artifact, created during the late Ptolemaic period around 50 BCE, appears to preserve astronomical knowledge from a much earlier era, knowledge that couldn't have been observed by the culture that created the temple itself. What these astronomical alignments and knowledge suggest is that the builders of Egypt's oldest monuments weren't merely primitive sun worshippers with rudimentary celestial observation, but possessed sophisticated understanding of cosmic cycles and mathematical astronomy. Their structures weren't oriented approximately towards significant stars, but positioned with precision measuring to fractions of a degree, accuracy that would require advanced surveying equipment and computational capabilities. This advanced astronomical knowledge serves a practical purpose beyond religious symbolism. By encoding precise information about celestial cycles in permanent stone monuments, the builders created a kind of temporal anchor point, a reference system that would allow future generations to track long-term astronomical cycles and predict important celestial events like eclipses, planetary alignments, and potentially hazardous near-Earth objects like comets and asteroids. In essence, Egypt's oldest monuments may have functioned as a sophisticated astronomical computer, a stone calculator designed to preserve critical knowledge about cosmic cycles across vast spans of time. This would explain why so much emphasis was placed on precise alignment and mathematical encoding in these structures, features that far exceed what would be necessary for purely ceremonial or burial purposes. But this astronomical knowledge goes beyond mere observation and tracking of celestial bodies. Egyptian texts contain references to what appear to be advanced astrophysical concepts, descriptions of stellar evolution, galactic structure, and cosmic processes that weren't discovered by modern science until the 20th century. These aren't vague or metaphorical references, but specific descriptions that align with our current understanding of how stars form, evolve, and die. For example, Egyptian creation myths describe the primordial state of the universe in terms that parallel modern Big Bang cosmology, initial point of infinite density and energy, from which all matter and space expanded. Their accounts of stellar formation describe processes remarkably similar to what contemporary astrophysics has confirmed about how stars condense from interstellar gas clouds. And their understanding of cosmic cycles mirrors our current knowledge of how galaxies, solar systems, and planets form and evolve over time. What if these weren't merely coincidental parallels, but preserved fragments of a much more advanced astronomical science possessed by a prehistoric civilization? The precision and detail evident in Egypt's oldest astronomical references suggest exactly this possibility, knowledge inherited from a much earlier scientific tradition rather than developed independently by a Bronze Age culture. This advanced astronomical understanding would have had practical applications beyond timekeeping and calendar creation. Knowledge of cosmic cycles and celestial mechanics would be essential for long-distance navigation, particularly oceanic voyages beyond sight of land. It would also be critical for predicting and preparing for celestial-induced catastrophes like comet impacts, solar flares, and other cosmic events that could threaten civilization. Indeed, some researchers have suggested that the prehistoric advanced civilization, whose knowledge is preserved in Egypt's oldest monuments, may have developed their sophisticated astronomical science precisely because they had experienced such a catastrophe in their own past. The detailed tracking of near-Earth objects and cosmic cycles evident in their astronomical systems suggests a culture acutely aware of the potential for celestial-induced disasters, awareness that would make sense if they had already survived such an event. This brings us full circle to the possibility that the advanced prehistoric civilization, whose technological legacy we see in ancient Egypt, was itself destroyed by a cosmic catastrophe. Perhaps the very comet impact that growing geological evidence suggests occurred around 12,800 years ago, triggering the Younger Dryas cooling period and causing massive flooding as ice sheets rapidly melted. If such a civilization existed, its survivors would have had powerful motivation to preserve their most critical knowledge in the most durable form possible: megalithic architecture with precise astronomical alignments and mathematical encoding. These stone monuments would serve as both repositories of essential scientific information and warning systems for future generations, allowing them to track cosmic cycles and prepare for potential recurrence of similar catastrophes. This model helps explain why Egypt's oldest monuments incorporate such precise astronomical alignments and mathematical relationships, features that far exceed what would be necessary for purely ceremonial or burial purposes. It also accounts for the numerous textual references to a time before dynastic Egypt, the first time when advanced beings walked among humans and established the foundations of civilization. As we integrate all these lines of evidence, megalithic architecture, precision machining, electrical artifacts, acoustic engineering, aerodynamic models, apparent genetic knowledge, and advanced astronomy, a coherent picture emerges of a prehistoric civilization with technological capabilities that rivaled or exceeded our own in certain specialized applications. This civilization appears to have reached its peak before the catastrophic events marking the end of the last ice age, with its survivors preserving fragments of their advanced knowledge in the structures and traditions that would eventually give rise to historical Egypt. The implications of this alternative historical model are profound, challenging us to reconsider not just the timeline of human technological development, but our entire understanding of civilization itself. Rather than seeing human history as a linear progression from primitive beginnings to current technological sophistication, we must consider the possibility of a cyclical pattern: advanced civilizations rising, falling, and rising again, with each cycle preserving fragments of knowledge from what came before. In this light, the magnificent monuments of ancient Egypt represent not the first flowerings of human achievement, but the legacy of a much older peak, preserved in stone by survivors, determined to ensure their knowledge would not be lost forever. The precision engineering, astronomical alignments, and mathematical encoding found in these structures may be the most enduring message from our prehistoric ancestors, a message we are only now beginning to decipher. As we stand today at the threshold of a new understanding of our own distant past, we must approach these ancient mysteries with both scientific rigor and open-minded wonder. The physical evidence in Egypt's oldest monuments cannot be dismissed or explained away by conventional archaeological theories. It demands a fundamental reassessment of human history and capabilities, a willingness to consider that our ancestors may have achieved levels of technological sophistication far beyond what conventional timelines suggest. Perhaps the most important lesson from this exploration is one of humility. If an advanced civilization existed in prehistoric times and was nearly wiped out by natural catastrophe, we face the sobering reality that our own technological society remains vulnerable to similar existential threats. The precise astronomical knowledge encoded in ancient monuments may represent not just scientific achievement, but a warning from the past about the cyclical nature of cosmic catastrophes. But the story of prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt doesn't end with astronomy and megalithic architecture. Even more tantalizing evidence awaits those brave enough to venture beyond mainstream archaeological narratives. As we continue our journey deeper into Egypt's forbidden technological past, we must confront perhaps the most extraordinary possibility of all: evidence suggesting ancient knowledge of atomic energy and nuclear physics. Hidden within the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, seldom displayed and rarely discussed in official tours, lie several peculiar glass artifacts excavated from the Western Desert. These pieces of pale yellow-green glass, known as desert glass, have perplexed scientists since their discovery. Unlike any natural formation, these glass specimens contain isotopes and crystalline structures that occur only under conditions of extreme heat and pressure, conditions identical to those created in nuclear detonations. The most extensive deposit of this mysterious glass lies scattered across a remote region of the Sahara called the Great Sand Sea, near the Libyan border. Covering an area of over 6,000 square kilometers, this is the largest natural glass deposit on Earth, consisting of nearly pure silica glass with a distinctive pale yellow-green coloration. Modern scientific analysis has determined that this glass formed approximately 28 million years ago, when temperatures reached at least 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to instantly melt sand into glass. Conventional geology attributes these glass formations to a meteoric airburst or impact event. But several anomalous characteristics challenge this explanation. The glass contains isotopes and trace elements in proportions that don't match known meteoritic compositions. More telling, microscopic examination reveals crystalline structures identical to those found at nuclear test sites in New Mexico and Nevada, structures that form only under conditions of nuclear-level energy release and neutron bombardment. What if these vast glass fields aren't evidence of a natural cosmic impact at all, but the remnants of prehistoric nuclear technology? The ancient Egyptians themselves seem to have recognized something special about this material. A carved scarab of desert glass was found among the treasures of Tutankhamun, suggesting this substance held particular significance in their culture. But most revealing are certain obscure hieroglyphic texts that contain what appear to be warnings about a fire from the sky that once devastated the western lands, leaving behind green stone that flows like water. These references gain extraordinary significance when we consider the Tully Papyrus and other ancient texts describing aerial vehicles and weapons of incredible destructive power. Egyptian writings speak of rods of fire, wielded by the gods that could level cities and turn deserts to glass. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as mere mythology, until the dawn of our own atomic age revealed that such capabilities are indeed physically possible. Even more compelling is what we find when we examine certain Egyptian temple walls and stone artifacts under ultraviolet light. In several underground chambers, particularly those at Dendera and beneath the Serapeum at Saqqara, the stone surfaces display patterns of vitrification and isotope distribution consistent with exposure to radiation. These patterns appear only in specific chambers and on particular stone objects, suggesting deliberate use rather than random environmental exposure. The radiation patterns are most pronounced around certain ceremonial objects, and in chambers bearing inscriptions referring to Sekhem power, a mysterious energy the ancient texts describe as capable of both creation and destruction. Traditional Egyptology translates Sekhem simply as power or vital force, but the specific context and associated symbols suggest something far more literal and technological, precisely the kind of dual-use energy we recognize in our own nuclear technology. But perhaps the most startling evidence comes from the bodies themselves. In several ancient Egyptian mummies, particularly those from the earliest dynasties, forensic analysis has detected bone marrow deterioration and cellular damage identical to that observed in victims of radiation exposure. These patterns of tissue destruction don't match any known ancient disease profile, but they precisely mirror the physiological effects of acute radiation syndrome, documented in modern medical literature. What makes these findings particularly compelling is their specificity. Not all mummies show these effects, only certain individuals from particular time periods and locations. This pattern suggests not environmental radiation affecting the general population, but limited exposure events that affected only specific groups, exactly what we would expect if radiation-producing technology existed, but was restricted to certain contexts or applications. The question, of course, is how such advanced physics knowledge could have existed in prehistoric times. The answer may lie in the mathematical encoding found in Egypt's oldest monuments. The proportions and measurements of the Great Pyramid and other megalithic structures incorporate constants and equations that precisely match those used in quantum physics and nuclear science, relationships that weren't rediscovered by modern science until the 20th century. For example, the ratio of certain chambers in the Great Pyramid precisely mirrors the wavelength relationships of hydrogen, the fundamental element whose nuclear fusion powers the stars. The positioning of specific stones and shafts corresponds exactly to equations describing atomic structure and nuclear decay chains. And most telling, certain obscure hieroglyphic sequences, when interpreted mathematically rather than linguistically, yield values matching the decay constants of radioactive elements, information that would be essential for any civilization working with nuclear processes. These mathematical relationships aren't approximate or coincidental, they're precise to multiple decimal places, displaying an accuracy that defies explanation in terms of primitive measurement techniques. Such precision could only come from actual understanding of the physical principles involved, suggesting the pyramid builders possessed knowledge of atomic and nuclear physics that wouldn't reemerge until thousands of years later. But if a prehistoric civilization indeed possessed such advanced knowledge, why don't we find more obvious evidence of their technology? The answer may lie in the very nature of catastrophic collapse. Any civilization experiencing a nuclear disaster would quickly learn to restrict and ultimately abandon such dangerous technology, particularly if it had played a role in their downfall. The survivors, rebuilding in a post-collapse world with limited resources, would preserve knowledge of certain fundamental principles while deliberately omitting the specific applications that had proven so destructive. This would explain why we find the mathematical and theoretical foundations of advanced physics encoded in ancient monuments, but not the technological applications themselves. The builders may have been deliberately preserving the core knowledge, while withholding the specific information needed to recreate the most dangerous technologies, creating a kind of time capsule that would allow future civilizations to rediscover these principles only when they had reached sufficient ethical and technological maturity to handle them responsibly. The evidence for prehistoric nuclear knowledge extends beyond Egypt to other ancient sites worldwide. In India, the ancient Sanskrit text Mahabharata describes weapons called Brahmastra that mirror modern nuclear weapons and their effects, creating explosions brighter than 1,000 suns, generating massive pillars of fire, and leaving behind sickness that caused hair and nails to fall out. Archaeological excavations at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa have uncovered skeletal remains with radiation damage, similar to that found in certain Egyptian mummies, along with evidence of vitrification consistent with extreme heat exposure. Similar evidence appears at certain ancient sites in Peru, Bolivia, and parts of the Middle East, always associated with the oldest and most megalithic structures, suggesting a common global source for this advanced knowledge. The pattern is consistent with what we would expect if a prehistoric global civilization had developed and ultimately misused nuclear technology, with survivors preserving fragments of their knowledge in various regions where they re-established civilization after the collapse. This sobering possibility forces us to reconsider not just our understanding of ancient technology, but our entire conception of human history and development. What if civilization isn't a single linear progression from primitive to advanced, but a cyclical pattern of rise, collapse, and rebuilding, with each cycle preserving fragments of knowledge from what came before? What if our own modern rediscovery of atomic energy represents not unprecedented innovation, but the rediscovery of principles known and ultimately abandoned by our distant ancestors? The implications extend beyond historical curiosity to urgent contemporary relevance. If a prehistoric advanced civilization did indeed develop and ultimately misuse nuclear technology, their fate stands as a warning to our own technological society facing similar existential choices. The elaborate encoding of fundamental physical principles in megalithic monuments, while apparently deliberately omitting the specific applications for weaponization, suggests a conscious effort by survivors to ensure future civilizations would understand the theoretical foundations while being spared the specific knowledge that had proven so destructive. In this light, the mysterious technologies evident in Egypt's oldest monuments may represent not just archaeological curiosities, but a message across time, a warning from ancestors who experienced the catastrophic consequences of technological power without corresponding wisdom. Their massive stone structures, designed to survive any conceivable disaster and encode information for thousands of generations, may be the most enduring communication we have from the last advanced human society to face the prospect of self-destruction through its own technological success. Let's now turn our attention to another category of evidence, suggesting prehistoric advanced knowledge, the numerous indications of sophisticated chemical and metallurgical understanding that appears fully formed in Egypt's earliest artifacts. Conventional archaeology struggles to explain how a supposedly primitive Bronze Age culture created metal alloys and chemical compounds that would challenge even modern industrial capabilities. Among the most perplexing of these artifacts are the enigmatic Baghdad batteries mentioned earlier, simple devices consisting of copper cylinders containing iron rods separated by asphalt plugs. When filled with an acidic solution like vinegar, these devices generate electricity through basic electrochemical reactions. Similar artifacts have been discovered at several Egyptian sites, suggesting this technology was widespread throughout the ancient Near East. But the true metallurgical mysteries go far deeper. In the Cairo Museum and other collections, researchers have identified ancient Egyptian artifacts made from aluminum, a metal that requires electricity for extraction and wasn't officially produced until the 19th century. Chemical analysis of these objects confirms they're made from aluminum with a purity level that rules out meteoritic origin, the only natural source of metallic aluminum. How did the ancient Egyptians produce a metal that requires 1000 degrees Celsius and electrical current to extract from its ore? Even more perplexing are the instances of metalwork showing evidence of advanced alloying techniques. Certain Egyptian ceremonial objects contain complex alloys combining copper, zinc, tin, and trace elements, like cobalt and nickel in proportions, that create specific properties, increased hardness, corrosion resistance, or particular electromagnetic characteristics. These aren't random combinations resulting from impure source materials, but precise formulations that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of metallurgical principles. The famous Iron Pillar of Delhi, though located in India rather than Egypt, demonstrates similar advanced metallurgical knowledge from the ancient world. This massive iron column, standing 24 feet high and weighing over 6 tons, has resisted corrosion for more than 1,600 years, despite exposure to monsoon conditions. Metallurgical analysis reveals it contains phosphorus and other elements in proportions that create a protective layer preventing rust, a technique of corrosion-resistant iron production that wasn't rediscovered by modern science until the 20th century. Egyptian texts contain numerous references to specialized metallurgical processes, described in terms that combine technical precision with symbolic language. They speak of transforming the base to the noble, transmutation of metals, capturing the fire of heaven, electrical or high-temperature processes, and fixing the wandering spirits within the body of matter, alloying or chemical bonding. While traditionally interpreted as merely allegorical or religious, these descriptions take on new significance when considered alongside the physical evidence of advanced metallurgical capabilities. The chemical knowledge evident in ancient Egyptian artifacts extends beyond metalwork to include sophisticated pigments, adhesives, and preservative compounds. The famous Egyptian blue pigment, a complex calcium-copper silicate, requires precise temperature control and specific atmospheric conditions to produce. Modern attempts to recreate this pigment using ancient techniques have consistently failed, suggesting the original manufacturers possessed knowledge and capabilities beyond what conventional history attributes to them. Even more telling are the adhesives used in certain Egyptian artifacts. Chemical analysis of the glues used to attach gold leaf to wooden objects reveals complex polymer compounds with molecular structures that couldn't form without precise temperature control and catalytic agents. Some of these adhesives remain effective after thousands of years, maintaining their bond strength and flexibility despite millennia of environmental exposure. The most extraordinary example of ancient Egyptian chemical knowledge appears in their mummification practices. The preservation techniques used on royal mummies involved not just simple dehydration and wrapping, but sophisticated chemical treatments that prevented cellular breakdown at the molecular level. Analysis of the preservation compounds found in the highest quality mummies reveals complex mixtures of antibacterial, antifungal, and antioxidant agents, combinations that demonstrate profound understanding of biochemical processes and decay mechanisms. What's particularly significant about these chemical and metallurgical capabilities is that they appear fully formed in Egypt's earliest periods, without evidence of the gradual development we would expect in an emerging technology. The oldest Egyptian artifacts often display the most advanced techniques and materials, with later periods showing declining rather than advancing capabilities, exactly the pattern we would expect if these technologies represented inherited knowledge from an earlier, more advanced civilization. This pattern appears not just in Egypt, but at ancient sites worldwide, from the mercury pools beneath pyramids in China, to the rust-resistant iron pillars of India, to the enigmatic metal artifacts of ancient South America. The global distribution of similar advanced metallurgical and chemical knowledge suggests a common source, a prehistoric civilization that had developed these technologies before the catastrophic events that marked the end of the last ice age. The survival of this metallurgical and chemical knowledge appears to have followed the same pattern we've observed with other prehistoric technologies, preserved in both encoded form in monumental architecture and through direct transmission via specialized priesthoods and craft guilds. Egyptian texts speak of the House of Life and other temple-based institutions that preserve specialized technical knowledge, including metallurgical and chemical processes considered too powerful or sacred for general use. These knowledge preservation institutions may represent the direct descendants of similar structures in the prehistoric advanced civilization, maintaining technical information through catastrophic collapse and rebuilding. The specialized craft guilds that emerged in later Egyptian society, organizations dedicated to specific technical skills like metalworking, stone cutting, or chemical preparation, may likewise represent the institutional continuation of knowledge transmission from the earlier civilization. This model helps explain one of the most persistent mysteries in ancient Egyptian technology: how certain specialized capabilities seem to appear without developmental precursors and remain restricted to particular applications rather than spreading throughout the culture. If these technologies represented preserved knowledge from an earlier civilization, maintained by specialized groups for specific purposes, we would expect exactly this pattern of isolated technical sophistication within an otherwise less advanced general culture. The chemical and metallurgical evidence forces us to reconsider our entire understanding of ancient technological capabilities. Rather than seeing the magnificent artifacts of ancient Egypt as the achievements of a primitive culture making unprecedented leaps in technical capability, we can understand them as the preserved legacy of a much older and more advanced civilization, one whose chemical and metallurgical knowledge in some ways rivaled or exceeded our own. As we continue exploring the evidence for prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt, we must address one of the most compelling yet controversial categories: indications of sophisticated knowledge transfer and information storage systems. Beyond the physical artifacts and monumental architecture, there are numerous signs that the ancient Egyptians or their prehistoric predecessors possessed methods for preserving and transmitting complex technical information across generations and vast distances. The most obvious manifestation of this knowledge system appears in the hieroglyphic writing itself, a script that combines phonetic elements with ideographic symbols in a complex system capable of encoding multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. What's particularly significant about Egyptian hieroglyphs is that they appear fully formed in the earliest dynastic period, without evidence of the gradual development we would expect in an emerging writing system. The oldest hieroglyphic inscriptions already display the full complexity and capability of the script, suggesting inheritance from an earlier, already developed writing tradition, rather than in situ invention. Even more telling, certain specialized hieroglyphs appear only in specific technical or scientific contexts, with shapes and arrangements that suggest they function as technical notation rather than ordinary language, similar to how modern scientific disciplines use specialized symbolic systems to encode complex information. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Egyptian information technology lies in what appears to be a sophisticated system of knowledge, encoding in architectural proportions and astronomical alignments. The Great Pyramid and other megalithic structures incorporate precise mathematical relationships that encode fundamental physical constants, pi, the golden ratio, the dimensions of Earth, astronomical cycles, and even more complex values related to planetary orbits and cosmic cycles. These encoded values aren't approximate or coincidental. They're precise to multiple decimal places, displaying an accuracy that defies explanation in terms of primitive measurement techniques. Such precision could only come from deliberate encoding of values already known through advanced observation and calculation, suggesting the pyramid builders were creating not just impressive monuments, but sophisticated information storage systems designed to preserve critical knowledge across millennia. This architectural encoding appears to function as a kind of stone computer, a physical database recording astronomical, mathematical, and physical constants in a form that could survive virtually any catastrophe short of planetary destruction. By incorporating these values into monumental structures built from multi-ton stone blocks, the builders created information storage systems with incredible durability, capable of preserving precise data for tens of thousands of years. The strategic placement of these encoded monuments at specific geographic locations creates another layer of information storage, a global positioning system that marks key points on Earth's surface. The Great Pyramid stands at the exact center of Earth's landmass, marking the intersection of the longest line of latitude and the longest line of longitude. Similar megalithic structures at other significant geographic locations, from Angkor Wat in Cambodia to Teotihuacan in Mexico, create a planet-wide grid of information nodes. This global pattern suggests not isolated developments, but a coordinated knowledge preservation system, exactly what we would expect if survivors of a prehistoric advanced civilization were attempting to preserve and transmit critical information after a catastrophic collapse. By encoding this knowledge in durable stone structures, positioned at strategic locations worldwide, they created a redundant information network that could survive localized disasters and ensure critical data would remain accessible to future generations regardless of which regions recovered first. The information encoded in these monuments appears to follow a sophisticated system of mathematical harmonics relationships based on specific ratios and proportions that create resonance patterns across multiple scales. These same harmonic relationships appear in Egyptian art, architecture, and music, suggesting a unified system of knowledge that integrated physics, mathematics, and aesthetics through a common language of proportion and vibration. This harmonic encoding system extends beyond architecture to include specialized artifacts that appear to function as computational devices. The most famous example is the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the Greek coast rather than in Egypt, but displaying technological capabilities that must have existed throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. This sophisticated astronomical computer, dating from around 100 BCE, could calculate and display planetary positions, solar and lunar eclipses, and other celestial events with remarkable precision. While the Antikythera mechanism itself comes from a relatively late period, its complexity and sophistication suggest a much older tradition of similar computational devices. Egyptian texts refer to mysterious objects called meques and merkit used for astronomical calculation and navigation, devices that may have functioned as earlier versions of the same technology. The sudden appearance of such sophisticated computational capabilities in the ancient world makes more sense if they represented preserved knowledge from a much older and more advanced scientific tradition. Even more intriguing are the references in Egyptian texts to what appear to be information storage and transmission systems beyond physical artifacts. The concept of Akashic Records, or the Hall of Records, a repository of all knowledge accessible through specific consciousness states or technologies, appears repeatedly in Egyptian religious and philosophical writings. While traditionally interpreted as purely metaphysical or spiritual concepts, these descriptions contain specific technical details that suggest they may refer to actual information systems of a type we're only beginning to conceptualize in our own era. Recent research in quantum information theory has demonstrated that information itself is a fundamental property of the universe, potentially encoded in the quantum field that underlies physical reality. Some physicists now propose that information may be preserved even through singularities, like black holes or cosmic collapse rebirth cycles, suggesting the theoretical possibility of information systems that transcend conventional physical storage media. What if the prehistoric advanced civilization had developed technologies that could access or interact with this quantum information field? The Egyptian references to knowledge written in the fabric of creation itself and accessible through specific technical means might represent not mystical metaphors, but descriptions of actual quantum information technologies, capabilities we're only now beginning to conceptualize theoretically. This perspective helps explain one of the most persistent mysteries in ancient Egyptian knowledge transmission: how certain sophisticated mathematical, astronomical, and physical concepts appear fully formed without developmental precursors, and how identical knowledge systems emerge simultaneously in cultures separated by vast distances with no known contact between them. If these cultures had access to a common information source beyond conventional physical records, perhaps through technologies that could interact with the quantum information field itself, this pattern of simultaneous emergence would be not just possible but expected. The evidence for prehistoric advanced information technology thus extends beyond physical artifacts to include sophisticated encoding systems, computational devices, and potentially even more exotic information storage and transmission methods. These capabilities appear to have been preserved through both physical means, monumental architecture, specialized artifacts, written records, and non-physical transmission through initiatic traditions and specialized knowledge lineages. As we assemble these diverse pieces of evidence, from megalithic architecture to precision machining, to electrical artifacts, to advanced metallurgy, to sophisticated information technologies, a coherent picture begins to emerge. Rather than isolated anomalies or coincidental resemblances, these findings represent the fragmented but persistent evidence of a prehistoric advanced civilization that thrived before the catastrophic events marking the end of the last ice age. This civilization appears to have possessed a unified scientific paradigm that integrated various fields we now consider separate: physics, engineering, biology, information theory, consciousness studies, into a comprehensive technological system. The remnants of this advanced knowledge were preserved by survivors who established what would eventually become dynastic Egypt and other early historical civilizations, encoding their scientific understanding in architectural forms, symbolic systems, and religious traditions designed to transmit essential information across millennia. The megalithic structures of ancient Egypt thus represent not the first primitive attempts at monumental architecture, but the last magnificent echoes of a far older and more advanced technological tradition, preserved in stone by survivors determined to ensure their knowledge would not be lost forever. The precision engineering, astronomical alignments, and mathematical encoding found in these structures may be the most enduring message from our prehistoric ancestors, a message we are only now beginning to decipher. As we near the conclusion of our exploration into prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt, we must confront perhaps the most profound implication of all: what this alternative historical narrative means for our understanding of human consciousness and potential. Beyond the physical artifacts and encoded knowledge systems lies evidence suggesting the prehistoric civilization possessed not just advanced material technology, but sophisticated understanding of consciousness itself as a technology. Egyptian texts contain numerous references to what appear to be technologies of consciousness, methods and devices for altering perception, accessing information, and affecting physical reality through directed mental processes. These aren't vague or metaphorical references, but specific technical descriptions of practices and technologies designed to harness the properties of consciousness for practical applications. The ancient Egyptian concept of Heka, often simplistically translated as magic, appears in technical contexts, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of consciousness as a causal force in physical reality. Hieroglyphic texts describe specific techniques for directing mental energy to achieve measurable effects, from healing physical ailments to influencing material processes. These descriptions include precise technical details about vocal frequencies, breathing patterns, mental focusing techniques, and external devices that enhance these effects. What's particularly significant about these consciousness technologies is their integration with the physical technologies we've already examined. The same proportional and harmonic systems encoded in pyramid architecture appear in Egyptian sound healing techniques. The electromagnetic properties evident in certain artifacts correspond to frequencies described in meditation practices. The astronomical alignments of monuments match configurations used in consciousness-altering ceremonial techniques. This integration suggests not separate domains of technology, but a unified field of knowledge that recognize consciousness and physical reality as complementary aspects of a single system, exactly the direction in which our own most advanced theoretical physics is now moving, as quantum theory increasingly recognizes the role of observation and consciousness in determining physical outcomes. Even more intriguing are the Egyptian references to what modern physicists would call non-local consciousness effects, the ability of trained practitioners to access information or influence events at a distance, beyond the limitations of conventional sensory perception or physical causation. These capabilities, once dismissed as mere superstition, have gained surprising support from recent research in quantum biology and consciousness studies, which suggests consciousness may indeed operate partially through quantum non-local effects. What if the prehistoric advanced civilization had developed technologies that could systematically harness these consciousness properties, creating a technological system that integrated both physical devices and trained mental capabilities? Such a unified technology would explain many of the most perplexing aspects of ancient Egyptian technical achievements, from the precision placement of massive stone blocks to the advanced mathematical knowledge encoded in their monuments. This perspective transforms our understanding of the initiatic traditions and mystery schools that emerged from ancient Egypt. Rather than seeing these as merely religious or philosophical systems, we can recognize them as technical training programs designed to preserve sophisticated consciousness technologies, methodologies for developing specific mental capabilities that could complement and enhance physical technological systems. The Egyptian emphasis on specific breathing techniques, visualization practices, sound production methods, and altered states of consciousness takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. These weren't primitive superstitious practices, but sophisticated technical methodologies for developing specific mental capabilities, training systems designed to produce individuals who could interface with and operate the integrated consciousness physical technologies of the prehistoric advanced civilization. This model helps explain one of the most persistent mysteries in ancient Egyptian culture, the extraordinary emphasis placed on specific states of consciousness and their relationship to physical reality. The elaborate preparation for the afterlife journey, the sophisticated understanding of various consciousness states and their characteristics, the technical details of how perception and awareness function in different domains, all suggest preservation of knowledge from a civilization that had developed a science of consciousness as advanced as its physical technologies. As we integrate this consciousness dimension with the physical evidence we've already examined, a truly comprehensive picture of prehistoric advanced technology begins to emerge. Rather than seeing ancient Egyptian achievements as either purely physical technology or purely mystical knowledge, we can recognize them as the preserved fragments of a unified science that integrated both domains, a technological system that harnessed both physical principles and consciousness capabilities in a seamless whole. This unified technology would have given the prehistoric civilization capabilities far beyond what either physical or consciousness technologies could achieve separately. The ability to affect matter through directed consciousness, to access information non-locally, to manipulate energetic fields through combined physical and mental techniques. These integrated capabilities would create a technological system that might appear almost magical when viewed through our own still separated domains of physical science and consciousness studies. The implications of this unified prehistoric technology extend far beyond historical curiosity to urgent contemporary relevance. As our own civilization develops increasingly powerful physical technologies while largely ignoring consciousness development, we face growing existential risks from technologies we may not have the wisdom to use responsibly. The prehistoric civilization appears to have developed both domains in parallel, creating not just powerful technologies, but the consciousness capabilities needed to use them wisely. This balanced development may represent the most important message encoded in ancient Egyptian monuments and texts, the understanding that technological advancement must be accompanied by corresponding development of consciousness, if a civilization is to survive its own increasing power. The elaborate systems for consciousness training, preserved in Egyptian initiatic traditions, may represent not primitive superstition, but sophisticated methodologies for developing the wisdom needed to handle advanced technologies responsibly. In this light, the mysterious technologies evident in Egypt's oldest monuments may represent not just archaeological curiosities, but a message across time, a warning from ancestors who recognize that technological power, without corresponding consciousness development, leads inevitably to catastrophe. They're massive stone structures designed to survive any conceivable disaster and encode information for thousands of generations. Maybe the most enduring communication we have from the last advanced human society to face the prospect of self-destruction through technological success without corresponding wisdom. As we stand today, at the threshold of a new understanding of our own distant past, we must approach these ancient mysteries with both scientific rigor and open-minded wonder. The physical evidence in Egypt's oldest monuments cannot be dismissed or explained away by conventional archaeological theories. It demands a fundamental reassessment of human history and capabilities, a willingness to consider that our ancestors may have achieved levels of technological and consciousness sophistication far beyond what conventional timelines suggest. Perhaps the most important lesson from this exploration is one of humility and integration. If an advanced civilization existed in prehistoric times and was nearly wiped out by catastrophe, perhaps precisely because they failed to maintain balance between technological power and wisdom, we face the sobering reality that our own technological society remains vulnerable to similar existential risks. The precise knowledge encoded in ancient monuments may represent not just scientific achievement, but a warning from the past about the necessity of developing consciousness capabilities that match our technological power. In the end, the megalithic structures of ancient Egypt stand as silent witnesses to a chapter of human history that has been largely forgotten, a time when our ancestors possessed knowledge and capabilities that in some ways may have surpassed our own. As we continue to decipher the message encoded in these stones, we may rediscover not just forgotten technologies, but a more integrated understanding of consciousness and reality that could prove essential for our own civilization's survival and flourishing. The prehistoric technology evident in ancient Egypt thus offers not just fascinating insights into our past, but potentially crucial guidance for our future. By recognizing that our ancestors may have developed sophisticated technologies integrated with advanced consciousness capabilities, we open ourselves to recovering not just their technical knowledge, but their wisdom, the understanding that true advancement requires developing both domains in harmony, creating technologies guided by the wisdom to use them for the benefit of all life. This may be the ultimate message encoded in Egypt's mysterious monuments and texts, a communication across millennia from ancestors who learned through hard experience that technological power must be balanced with consciousness development if civilization is to endure. As we stand at our own crossroads of technological promise and peril, this ancient wisdom may prove to be the most valuable technological legacy of all, the understanding that our future depends not just on what we can build, but on who we become in the process. But there remains one aspect of prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt that we've only touched upon, perhaps the most profound and far-reaching of all. The evidence suggests our ancestors didn't merely possess isolated technological capabilities, but an entirely different relationship with reality itself, one that unified science, consciousness, and what we might call spirituality into a seamless technological framework that transcended the divisions we've created in our modern world. Throughout Egypt's most ancient temples and tombs, we find references to what Egyptologists typically translate as the Merkaba, a complex energetic field surrounding the human body that could be consciously activated through specific techniques. Conventional interpretations dismiss this as mere religious symbolism, but the technical precision with which these fields are depicted tells a different story. The geometric proportions, mathematical relationships, and activation sequences described in these ancient texts mirror principles now being rediscovered in quantum field theory and bioelectromagnetics. In the deepest chambers of Karnak Temple, away from tourist paths and rarely photographed, exist extraordinary reliefs showing what appear to be humans operating within geometric energy fields. These depictions show concentric counter-rotating fields arranged in specific proportional relationships that create what modern physicists would recognize as hyperdimensional geometry. The accompanying hieroglyphic texts describe these fields as chariots of light that could transport consciousness across vast distances, both physical and dimensional. What if these weren't mythological fantasies, but technical diagrams documenting actual technology? A technology not of metal and electricity, as we understand it, but of crystallized consciousness, systems that utilize the inherent properties of awareness itself to manipulate physical reality at fundamental levels? Such capabilities would transcend our conventional divisions between technology and spirituality, creating a unified system that operated through consciousness, rather than despite it. This perspective transforms our understanding of the strange elongated skulls found in certain Egyptian royal tombs. Rather than mere physical deformities or aesthetic modifications, these cranial alterations may have served a technological purpose, physically reshaping the brain and its electromagnetic field to enhance specific consciousness capabilities required to operate their integrated technological systems. The precise measurements and proportions of these modified skulls follow the same mathematical relationships found in Egyptian architecture and astronomical alignments, suggesting they form part of a unified technological system. Walking now through the hushed corridors of the Osirian at Abydos, your footsteps echo against stone walls, cut with impossible precision. Your fingers trace the smooth surface of granite blocks weighing hundreds of tons, fitted together with gaps narrower than a human hair. Here, in the pre-dawn stillness, with no artificial lights to distort your perception, you can almost sense the residual energy patterns still flowing through these ancient stones, the whispered remnants of technologies we're only beginning to rediscover. The walls themselves tell stories of technological integration that transcend our modern categories. Carvings show humans interfacing directly with devices that appear to amplify consciousness itself, geometric forms that modern researchers would recognize as waveguides for non-physical energies. The hieroglyphic texts describe these technologies not as external tools, but as extensions of consciousness itself, systems that allowed trained operators to perceive and manipulate vibrational frequencies beyond ordinary human sensing. Perhaps most extraordinary are the references to what can only be described as biotechnology, the systematic enhancement of human capabilities through both external devices and internal modifications. Egyptian texts describe individuals called followers of Horus, who possessed abilities far beyond ordinary humans, extended lifespans, enhanced sensory perception, direct access to information fields, and the capacity to manipulate matter through focused consciousness. These weren't portrayed as magical powers, but as systematically developed capabilities, resulting from specific technological interventions and training methodologies. The evidence for this biotechnology appears in unexpected places, anomalous skeletal remains discovered in tombs from Egypt's earliest periods. Scientific analysis of these bones reveals unusual characteristics, higher mineral density, modified cranial capacity, altered spine configuration, and trace elements suggesting systematic enhancement through both genetic modification and technological augmentation. These weren't random mutations, but deliberate alterations, following precise mathematical patterns, the same patterns encoded in pyramid proportions and astronomical alignments. As morning light now floods the ancient chambers, illuminating wall paintings that have retained their vibrant colors for thousands of years, another technological mystery emerges. Chemical analysis of these pigments reveals complex molecular structures that shouldn't deteriorate over time, yet they haven't. Some contain crystalline lattices that appear to self-repair at the molecular level, maintaining their coherence despite millennia of environmental exposure. These aren't simple mineral colorants, but complex bioengineered compounds that interact with light in ways our most advanced photonics are only beginning to achieve. The pigments themselves contain trace elements arranged in patterns identical to those used in modern quantum dot technology, arrangements that allow precise manipulation of light frequencies for information storage and transmission. Under specific light frequencies, certain tomb paintings reveal additional layers of information invisible to the naked eye, technical diagrams, mathematical formulas, and detailed anatomical information that appear only when illuminated with the correct wavelengths. What appears decorative to casual observation reveals itself as sophisticated information storage under proper examination. This multidimensional approach to information storage extends beyond visual media to include acoustic encoding as well. Certain chambers in Egypt's oldest temples demonstrate remarkable acoustic properties, not just general sound amplification, but precise frequency-specific effects that occur only when particular tones are produced at specific locations. When the correct sequences of sounds are generated, standing wave patterns form that make visible the exact mathematical relationships encoded in the architecture itself, creating temporary energy fields that modern physicists would recognize as localized modifications of the quantum vacuum. Standing now in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, you can feel the peculiar sensation these acoustic properties create, a subtle vibration that seems to resonate not just in the air but within your very cells. As your voice produces the specific tone that matches the chamber's resonant frequency, a perfect A at 432 Hz, the granite walls seem to dissolve around you, creating a momentary sense of expanded perception that transcends ordinary consciousness. This isn't imagination, but a measurable neurological effect documented by modern researchers, evidence that these ancient chambers were designed as consciousness technologies, utilizing principles we're only beginning to rediscover. What emerges from this evidence is a picture of prehistoric technology, fundamentally different from our own, not more primitive, but operating on entirely different principles. Rather than separating consciousness from technology, this ancient system integrated them, creating tools and methods that extended human perception and capability through direct interface with the properties of awareness itself. These weren't external devices used by unchanged humans, but integrated systems that modified the operators themselves, creating enhanced capabilities through the merger of consciousness and technology. This perspective helps explain one of the most persistent mysteries in ancient Egyptian culture, the extraordinary emphasis placed on specific states of consciousness and their relationship to physical reality. The elaborate preparation for the afterlife journey, the sophisticated understanding of various consciousness states and their characteristics, the technical details of how perception and awareness function in different domains, all suggest preservation of knowledge from a civilization that had developed a science of consciousness as sophisticated as its physical technologies. Moving now to the shadowy confines of the Serapeum at Saqqara, you stand before the massive granite boxes conventionally described as bull sarcophagi. In the flickering light of your lamp, these 70-ton stone containers reveal their true nature, not simple coffins, but sophisticated resonance chambers. Each box is carved to precise mathematical proportions that create specific vibrational fields when activated by sound or electromagnetic energy. The inner surfaces, polished to optical flatness, create standing wave patterns that modern physicists would recognize as toroidal energy fields, the same patterns now being explored in zero-point energy research. What if these stone boxes weren't tombs at all, but components of an integrated energy system, devices designed to generate and manipulate fields that interface directly with consciousness itself? The specific positioning of these devices, their precise mathematical relationships to each other and to celestial alignments, and their unusual material composition all suggest technological purpose rather than ceremonial function. They appear to be nodes in a larger network, components of an integrated system, whose full extent and purpose we're only beginning to glimpse. This network extends beyond individual sites to encompass the entire Egyptian landscape. When mapped precisely, the locations of major temples and pyramids reveal a mathematical pattern of astonishing complexity, a geometric grid that corresponds exactly to the wavelengths of specific electromagnetic and gravitational frequencies. This isn't random placement, but deliberate positioning to create a countrywide technological system, a network of structures that together formed what modern scientists might call a scalar wave interferometry grid. Such a system could theoretically amplify and direct energy fields across vast distances, creating effects ranging from weather modification to gravitational manipulation to consciousness enhancement. The specific mathematical relationships between these sites encode the precise frequencies and phase relationships required to generate such effects, information preserved in stone for millennia, waiting for a civilization advanced enough to recognize and utilize it. As the midday sun now beats down upon the ancient stones, casting sharp shadows that mark precise astronomical alignments, another layer of this prehistoric technology reveals itself. The megalithic structures of ancient Egypt weren't just buildings or monuments, but components of a vast planetary engineering system, a technology designed to stabilize Earth's energetic fields during periods of cosmic instability. The specific locations, orientations, and internal geometries of these structures create a global network that interacts directly with the planet's electromagnetic and gravitational fields. This perspective transforms our understanding of why such massive, precisely engineered structures were built in the first place. They weren't merely symbolic or ceremonial, but functional components of a planetary technology, a system designed to maintain specific energy conditions necessary for advanced civilization to thrive. The enormous resources dedicated to their construction make sense only if they served a critical technological purpose, one important enough to justify the extraordinary effort involved in their creation. Evidence for this planetary engineering appears in the precise geodetic positioning of major structures. The Great Pyramid stands at the exact center of Earth's land mass, marking the intersection of the longest line of latitude and the longest line of longitude. Similar megalithic structures at other significant geographic locations, from Angkor Wat in Cambodia to Teotihuacan in Mexico to the recently discovered underwater structures near Cuba, create a planet-wide grid of precisely positioned monuments. What's particularly telling is that these structures incorporate identical mathematical relationships, despite their separation by vast oceans and supposed lack of contact between their builders. The same precise proportions, astronomical alignments, and geometric principles appear at megalithic sites worldwide, suggesting not independent development, but components of a unified global system. These weren't isolated monuments built by separate cultures, but nodes in a planetary network designed and implemented by a unified prehistoric civilization. The specific mathematical relationships encoded in these structures correspond exactly to fundamental cosmic constants, the precession cycle, the relationship between Earth's magnetic and rotational fields, the resonant frequencies of the planet's core, mantle, and crust. These aren't arbitrary measurements, but precise values required for technological systems designed to interact with planetary and cosmic energies. The builders weren't just creating impressive monuments, they were establishing a functional technology embedded in the very fabric of our planet. This global system appears to have been designed with extraordinary foresight, incorporating mathematical relationships that would maintain its functional effectiveness despite thousands of years of continental drift, magnetic pole shifts, and other planetary changes. The builders created not just for their own time, but for a far distant future, preserving critical technology through catastrophic cycles that they apparently knew would come. Standing now in the fading light of afternoon, as shadows lengthen across ancient stones that have witnessed millennia pass like moments, the full implications of this prehistoric technology begin to emerge. What we're seeing in Egypt's oldest monuments isn't just impressive architecture or symbolic religious expression, but the remnants of an integrated technological system far more sophisticated than our conventional history, allows a technology that operated on principles we're only beginning to rediscover. This ancient system unified domains we've artificially separated: physics and consciousness, technology and spirituality, science and art. It created tools that extended human capabilities not by mechanical augmentation, but by direct interface with the properties of awareness itself. It developed methodologies for systematically enhancing human perception and influence through the merger of technological devices with consciousness training. And it encoded this knowledge in durable stone structures designed to preserve essential information through catastrophic cycles of destruction and rebuilding. The evidence suggests this prehistoric civilization recognized something our own technological culture has largely forgotten: that consciousness itself is a fundamental property of reality, not merely an epiphenomenon of brain activity. They developed technologies that worked with this understanding rather than against it, creating systems that amplified and utilized the inherent properties of awareness rather than trying to eliminate the human factor from technological function. This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient Egyptian achievements, from primitive attempts at monumental architecture to sophisticated applications of advanced scientific principles. The precise astronomical alignments, mathematical encoding, and geometric relationships weren't created through trial and error with primitive tools, but through systematic application of advanced knowledge inherited from an earlier, more sophisticated civilization, one that had developed a unified science integrating domains we still struggle to connect. As twilight descends upon the ancient monuments, casting them an ethereal purple light that blurs the boundary between solid stone and vibrating energy, the most profound implication of all emerges. What if the prehistoric technology evident in Egypt's oldest structures represents not just different tools, but a fundamentally different relationship with reality itself, a scientific paradigm that recognized consciousness as an integral aspect of the physical world rather than a separate phenomenon? Such a unified paradigm would transcend our current divisions between objective and subjective, between physical and metaphysical, between technological and spiritual. It would create possibilities for technological development along entirely different lines than those we've pursued, generating capabilities that might appear almost magical when viewed through our fragmented understanding of reality. The prehistoric technology encoded in ancient Egyptian monuments may represent exactly this alternative developmental path, not a primitive precursor to our own technology, but a sophisticated application of principles developed along entirely different lines. The survivors of this earlier civilization appear to have preserved not just isolated techniques or devices, but the foundational knowledge of an integrated science that we've yet to fully rediscover. As night falls completely, and stars appear in the desert sky in configurations slightly shifted from those the ancient builders knew, yet still following the same cosmic patterns they mapped with such precision, we're left with both a mystery and an opportunity. The mystery lies in how such advanced knowledge could have existed in our distant past, only to be lost and forgotten as conventional history began. The opportunity lies in the possibility of recovering not just their technological capabilities, but their integrated understanding of reality itself, a perspective that might prove crucial for our own civilization's sustainable development. The prehistoric technology evident in ancient Egypt thus offers not just fascinating insights into our past, but potentially crucial guidance for our future. By recognizing that our ancestors may have developed sophisticated technologies integrated with advanced consciousness capabilities, we open ourselves to recovering not just their technical knowledge, but their wisdom, the understanding that true advancement requires developing both domains in harmony, creating technologies guided by the wisdom to use them for the benefit of all life. This may be the ultimate message encoded in Egypt's mysterious monuments and texts, a communication across millennia from ancestors who learned through hard experience that technological power must be balanced with consciousness development if civilization is to endure. As we stand at our own crossroads of technological promise and peril, this ancient wisdom may prove to be the most valuable technological legacy of all, the understanding that our future depends not just on what we can build, but on who we become in the process. As you leave the ancient sites behind, their massive stones still humming with barely perceptible energies accumulated over thousands of years, you carry with you not just new information, but a transformed perspective. The evidence for prehistoric advanced technology in Egypt challenges not just our timeline of human development, but our entire understanding of what technology can be. It suggests possibilities for advancement along paths we've barely explored, developments that integrate consciousness and physical reality rather than treating them as separate domains. In the quiet darkness of the desert night, with ancient monuments silhouetted against a star-filled sky, the most important question remains: will we heed the message our ancestors encoded in stone? Will we recognize that true advancement requires balancing technological power with wisdom, external development with internal transformation? Or will we continue along our current path of increasing capability without corresponding consciousness development, risking the same fate that appears to have befallen the prehistoric civilization, whose fragments we've explored? The answer lies not in the ancient stones themselves, but in how we respond to their message, whether we dismiss these anomalies as curiosities and coincidences, or recognize them as evidence of possibilities beyond our current paradigm. The prehistoric technology of ancient Egypt offers us not just forgotten knowledge, but an alternative vision of what human civilization might become, a future that integrates domains we've artificially separated, creating technologies that work with consciousness rather than around it. As dawn approaches once more, bringing first light to monuments that have witnessed countless such cycles, the choice remains ours. Will we learn from the past, or repeat its apparent pattern of advancement followed by collapse? Will we recover not just the technological capabilities of our ancestors, but their integrated understanding of reality itself? The answers to these questions may determine not just our understanding of history, but the course of our civilization's future. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the forbidden realms of Egypt's technological past. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, please like this video and subscribe to join us for future adventures into the mysteries of our ancient world. And remember to share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspect of prehistoric technology do you find most compelling? Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep your mind open to the extraordinary possibilities hidden in plain sight all around us.